Well,
We go ahead and bring everyone in from the waiting room.
all right, admitting now.
And Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and disable the waiting room. That's okay.
Sure.
Hey, everybody, welcome. Hey, Ashley. Hey, Mike. Good to see y'all. Ashley, I feel like you're in a new location. Yeah.
Yeah, the for Row Climate, we got a nice bigger office space in downtown Coos Bay. So
Hey.
yeah, moving on up.
Nice. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome, everybody. We've got folks just kind of still arriving here. If you're one of our roundtable members or agency members, just so it's easy enough for us to track y'all, if you wouldn't mind just renaming yourself to say RT underscore and then your name. And even like John, we've got you with an RT at the back. If you could put the RT at the front when we're sorting participants, that really helps us out. And Trevor is going through and trying to catch it too, but if you could just do that on your own, that'd be awesome. And like Natalia, even our agency friends or Delia, just go ahead and put an RT in front as well. Thank you. And same thing for any folks here with tribes as well. So Chief Barrett, we can rename you. Just go ahead and put an RT in front. We're glad you're here. Bob, it's good to see you. Welcome. And then if you're in a place where you can turn your camera on a little bit just as we kind of do our welcome and opening, just so we feel as human as possible here together. That would be great. And totally get it if you're in a spot and still in your PJs and coffee, that's okay too. Good to see you, Don. Hey, Laurel. Hey, Andrea. Hey, Amy. All right. Trevor, is it feeling like we've got kind of critical mass? We got you on mute still.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, we're up to 35 already. So
Okay.
I think we're close.
Right on. And yes, Ramfy's PJs are always welcome. Whatever you want to come to this conversation with that helps you be your full self is welcome. Um, Jeff, how you feeling? You ready to get started here?
Let's do it.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I haven't seen you for well, it's been 2 months now, I suppose. But I'm Bobby with Oregon Consensus. We're here at the April meeting of the Floating Offshore Wind Roadmap Roundtable. It's springtime. It's tax day, so we all love to celebrate tax day, or you can celebrate your garden coming to life, longer days, more light in the evening, all those kinds of things. But we're here to basically kind of continue working on the roadmap. Now, if you look at the agenda for today, there's a couple of key things we're hoping to get through today. We have the agenda divided up into two sessions. We've got the morning session kind of from 10 to lunchtime. And then we've got an afternoon session as well from just after lunchtime to about 2:30. The key things we're going to go through, we talked a little bit at our last meeting in Lincoln City about an update to the overall process for the roadmap. So we'll go through that a little bit this morning. Hopefully you all got a chance to look at the materials that Jeff sent out in advance as well, because we have updated roadmap diagrams. So if you remember, when we were in Florence, we started the process of kind of road mapping out and some of the key waypoints along the way. And all of the feedback that you've been giving, Jeff and DLCD tried to put those together into an updated version of the diagrams. That's what we're going to focus a ton of attention on today. We'll break for lunch. And then after lunch, we'll come and talk a little bit more about the concept of exit ramps. Where might they be? But also, most importantly, what exactly happens? How do you get out of an exit ramp? All those kinds of things. We'll have two opportunities for public comment, one after the morning session, one after the afternoon session. And just as a reminder, as folks are interacting, we have roundtable members, agency members, and representatives from Oregon tribes. We're really excited to hear from you all. If you're a member of the broader community and public that are joining us today, we have those opportunities for public comment that we'd love to hear from you at those moments as well. With the chat function, you're welcome to use that, but we'd really like to try and keep comments and feedback kind of in the open space as much as possible. You might hear me or Sophia or Trevor at some point saying, hey, guys, chat's getting a little active. Let's bring that conversation over. So you might hear us doing some of that. And then I think the last bit of just kind of context setting, I was thinking about both the conversation we had in Lincoln City and kind of where we're getting ready to go. And we're building a roadmap around offshore wind. And I was just thinking of, it's coming up for Passover, Easter, whichever holiday you might be, celebrating this spring. And for our family, it's Easter, and we all love going to my aunt's house because she's got some of the best honey baked ham and pecan pie around. But she lives on the edge of the mountains out in the desert, and it's a pretty sketchy road to try and get there. And so we always have a conversation with my aunt about, hey, Aunt Sherry, like, how are we going to make this road safer to get out there? It takes so long. I'd like to get there faster, all those kinds of things. And like half our family says, oh, we need more speed bumps so that we slow things down and that makes it better for the neighbors. Other folks are like, oh, we need better guardrails or widening of the road so that we're not going over all that desert washboard. Both of those things are true, right? Both of those help us get to my aunt's house for a really nice meal at the end of the day, but the how is really different. That's exactly some of the feedback that we're getting on the floating offshore wind roadmap. That there's a couple different kinds of approaches that get us to a spot that we all can agree on, that we want communities that thrive, we want clean energy, we want all those kinds of things, but how we get there is interesting. And Ramphis, you can totally fact check where Aunt Sherry hangs out. We can talk about that. But enough about my Aunt Sherry. But I ask that kind of the as we go through these conversations, we're holding that polarity, those differences of, hey, we can't have everything all at once, but there's several things that are good. And so that's going to be our conversations we get through some of the roadmap piece. So that's my overall kind of opening. I was going to, Jeff, turn it over to you to start with some updates, but any other kind of context setting that you'd like to do?
No, I think today what I see is where we are in the process is kind of getting back to the question of the path. We have spent quite a bit of time talking about the effects that we care about, the benefits we want to capture, and the ways in which we can use our leverage as a state to try to avoid those effects that we don't want to see happen and capture those benefits that we do. And we've learned a lot from that, maybe more than it might seem, that is helping the behind the scenes work as I'm trying to turn this feedback into something in writing. We have a lot of conversations yet to be had. I recognize that. I'm hearing that as feedback. And I'm hoping that as part of today, this group can bring some good, constructive, creative ideas on how we can accomplish that together, to have those conversations we haven't had yet, and how to structure those in a way that's successful. If there are people we need to bring in, if there are ways and questions that need to be asked, I would really benefit from your help on that. But I think the main centerpiece for today is to look at these wavy diagrams that you all would have received in your email, and I put the link in the chat today, and try to see how close or far we are at this moment from identifying a path that might work if we could travel it, and help us understand what's missing, where is more detail needed, and where might we find it. Let's start getting into refining that path. And I'm hoping that that can be where we devote a lot of our collective creative effort today. So let's start talking. Do you want to remind folks that we have this? Oh, can everyone see my screen?
It looks great, Jeff.
Yep, great. Okay. We do have a question box. I haven't seen much in it since January, but it is open. There's a Google form version. We also have an email address. If you want to be talking directly to this process, asking questions, I encourage you to use that. You can also always reach out to me, Roundtable members, if there's something that you want to talk through, ask a question about how our process is going. Occasionally people will send me interesting articles and research reports, things that I haven't seen, and I super appreciate that. Susan Chambers sent me one yesterday, a report from the GAO, the General Accounting Office of the US, hot off the presses, talking about the BOEM leasing process and what it needs to do to be more responsive to communities, fishing groups, tribes, and how at the federal level changes could be made to improve the process. So if that's something that's of interest to you, there's all kinds of stuff out there. There was a Pacific Northwest National Labs report that came out a couple of months ago about transmission on the West Coast and how to be coordinated and where we can get bang for the buck. And I've been in contact with the lead author of that study and hope to bring him here to talk to us. So anyway, please be in touch. As Bobby said, here are our main pieces out of today. We're going to be talking about that roadmap, schedule, and process updates. I'll report out where we are with our work groups, and we have one draft recommendation for discussion today, the roadmap diagram and the exit ramp. So quite a lot today, meaty topics. And now for a lot of bullets. I wanted to let you all know what I've been up to since our last meeting in February. It's been a couple of months. There's a lot of coordination work happening behind the scenes. First and foremost, been working with Oregon Consensus, and we had a small group that volunteered to help us work through how we can make best use of a longer process. We are working with the legislature. I believe the draft bill just dropped on the Oregon Legislative Information System yesterday or today, to extend the overall timeline of this roadmap process. And so talking about how can we make best use of that. We also had some working group meetings in March. If I recall correctly, all three of our working groups met during that time. And as I said, we got our spatial planning group to the point where we have some draft language to bring to the main stage here for discussion. We're still kind of working our way through the other groups, and there are more conversations to come that it's on me to schedule those. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. I also wanted to let everyone know that we have engaged with another contract consulting firm to help us do some additional community engagement. If you remember the cartoon schedule that I put at the very beginning of our process, we talked about having some focus groups to supplement this roundtable for those people who maybe can't devote the time that we all can to this topic, or those communities that we really want to make sure that we are reaching as we're trying to get good feedback for this roadmap. We're also planning some public meetings that are going to come out of that work. And the first one is scheduled for next week, Thursday, April 24th in Seaside at the Bob Chisholm Community Center from 5:30 to 7:30. We sent out a notice on our listserv. We're going to be doing some additional outreach and media releases. I talked to the radio up there. It aired yesterday. We're trying to bring people in. And again, as I mentioned, kind of at the beginning of our process, the intention was always that around this time, we were going to poke our heads up and look around and say, we've been meeting as a roundtable. We've been producing some thought. We've been brainstorming what could be in this roadmap. And now we're to a point where I want to take it to some communities and kind of see how we're doing. And so the the purpose of these meetings will be one, just to catch people up on the story of where things are with offshore wind in Oregon, let people know, what the status is, explain that we are building this roadmap and why and what its purpose is, talk through some of the, where we are on why we're even wanting and considering offshore wind as an option for Oregon's future. And then I want to talk about some of the things that we've talked about here. I want to let people know the effects that we all talked about together, these diagrams and this waypoint path that we're developing. I'm really hoping that out of today's discussion, I have a good enough version that I can put it on the wall in the room and let people take a look at it and put their own thoughts and priorities onto that process. I want to talk to people about the policy assessment work that we're doing and some of the gaps we're seeing and some of the desires that we're hearing in this group, and then hear whether there are more. So there's going to be some amount of information sharing. There will be a Q&A for folks who just want to learn. And then we'll have an open mic in the middle of the room where we can just listen. And then once that portion is over, just be in the room with the pieces that we have on the wall, be able to talk to people. And then we're planning to have just like a short takeaway survey that folks can have, just like a 5-minute, just as a way to gather feedback and connect people to the work that we're doing here, really with the intention of making people aware about this open process and about their ability to participate in it. So just let y'all know that that's coming. And I also want to offer up and ask if there's anybody who wants to come to this public meeting next week. I would love to have roundtable members there to help tell this story, and to be there to answer questions and share your perspectives as well. So please, if you can, we'd love to have you. And then I'll also mention we're planning to have a meeting in Brookings coinciding with our next roundtable meeting in mid-May, and then a public meeting in June in Coos Bay to coincide with our June meeting that'll be in Florence.
Hey Jeff, can I ask you a quick question on that? Just
Please.
for roundtable members that are going to be able to be there, are you imagining that you'll, like, I'm just looking at chat, it's like, hey Julia, so glad you're here in Seaside, like anything you want to add kind of stuff, or you'll just say, hey, any roundtable members, can you raise your hand if folks have questions about what's going on in the process, just find them afterwards? Have you gotten that far yet?
I haven't. I would be comfortable if people are comfortable speaking. I think that would be great. And I also have been thinking about, if others have information you want to bring in and have a table, like let's talk and see if there's an opportunity there as well, just to expand the amount of information that's available. So.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. I mean, this roundtable are kind of ambassadors for the roundtable process itself, right?
In other things that we've been up to since February, we did have a tribal table meeting that occurred in March. We're trying to schedule our next one probably around the late May timeframe is what we're aiming for. Just so people know, we are having that conversation with the federally recognized tribes of Oregon and working through um, the topics and issues that we want to discuss to put in the roadmap. I've also been working to develop a plan for fisheries engagement, recognizing that that's an area where we have not dug too deep yet in this process. I came up with an initial plan and then vetted it, talked with some of our roundtable members who are representing or part of the fishing community and with ODFW as well, and came up with the basic bones of a community, or excuse me, a fisheries engagement plan, starting with me just going to the different commodity commissions that we have in the state to again let people know about this roadmap. And I have some questions for them about some specific points of feedback that I'm interested in hearing to help us shape what our policy goals ought to be or what our strategic opportunities are. um, I'm also talking with Oregon Sea Grant about helping me out with a kind of a research project, talking through what the different engagement structures and frameworks might be for Oregon in the future, and when is the right time to be engaging fishing groups. Just this question of if a developer or if the state at some point wants to talk to the fisheries, what is the right way to do it? And what are the needs of like the capacity needs for something like that? And we have some examples from the past, that some of which are still around today, the fact, fine, and source committees along the coast that have been involved in wave energy conversations and wind in the past, and just trying to understand that. We would like to have a fisheries specific topic at an upcoming roundtable meeting. I think we're aiming for the May meeting. And so want to make sure that we're structuring that conversation right and doing some outreach to bring in people from the fishing community who want to come to a meeting that's, about them. And then I'm exploring the idea of maybe hitting the road in the summer and just being in some places on the coast and having some additional opportunities for conversation there. Still kind of fleshing that out. Also, since February, been having continued conversations with the Oregon Department of Energy on the energy strategy. In February, we talked about the meeting they had at OMSI in January, and we had some ideas for additional information that we would like to hear or studies that we're interested in them doing. And so I've been having some conversations with them, trying to better understand what their model did and didn't do when it came to offshore wind and kind of the overall picture of that. Still ongoing. I was also invited to talk at a couple of conferences. One, just recently, there was a California-based offshore wind transmission conference down in San Francisco that I participated in virtually, just giving them an update from Oregon. And the main question that I asked them was, what are the opportunities for Oregon to share the pie of the opportunity in California? If we're talking about the potential for supply chain development, but California is out ahead of us, are there opportunities for us to coordinate there? And I also brought up this idea that we've been talking about in our work group for research agenda coordination, that if we were to organize some sort of research agenda collaborative for Oregon, might we build something that is Pacific Coast wide, and how can we be coordinated on that? I also gave the Oregon update to the Oceanic State of the States, and similarly, saying where we are in our process and the things we've been talking about. And the big question I asked there was, who has a vision for me about what the supply chain opportunity is and could be? I think that that's an area where I'm looking for help. I'm looking for ideas on what the state needs to be doing, where those opportunity areas are, so that we can be responsive to those. And out of that, it shook out some outreach. A couple of the developer companies reached out to me, and had some interesting conversations about where the opportunities might be in Oregon in the future. I'll say the nugget that really stuck with me was there's been this perception, or at least people have been wondering, could you assemble a base and a spar and your turbine somewhere else, say in California or in Washington, and tow it to Oregon without needing to do port development in Oregon to have one of those type of facilities with the big cranes that can put it together. And what I heard from one of the companies was that that's highly unlikely. That really, in order to make an industry work in Oregon, you would need to have some sort of integration facility at an Oregon port. And the most likely one from the studies that have been done would be at Port of Coos Bay. So for me, that was a bit of dispelling a myth that there might be this alternative. And it really brings home that part of this conversation about our offshore wind roadmap needs to be inclusive of that portside development, and that we are better off assuming that if it's going to happen in Oregon, it does involve some significant port development, and that belongs in the conversation. And then the last thing, just as I mentioned, lots of reports coming in, lots of information to process. I have like 75 tabs on my browser. It's ridiculous. Just trying to sift through all the possible information to make sure that this roadmap, as it comes together, is using the best available information. I've been working with our grad student who's helping us to go back and look at the Maine roadmap and the California roadmap and just cull the actions that came out of that, and make a big spreadsheet. And I think an interesting exercise for this group would be to do a crosswalk and say, look at all the things that Maine said they wanted to do. What are the ones that fit Oregon? What are the ones that we're ready for? And what are the ones that we're not, as potential future for us? I guess I'll pause there. Any questions or reflections on what's been going on? I know I took a while there. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff going on, I think, is the moral of that story, right?
Yeah.
Do you have the bill number, Jeff, that's would be housing, or Alexis, that's housing the possibility of the extension that you could drop into?
Yeah, so I have the bill number. It's not on OLIS yet, and it is 3963. But I just heard about it yesterday, and I believe it's in Rep. Gomberg's hands. I think they're working through posting it with the Speaker's office.
Okay, you were breaking up a little bit there, but to confirm, it was 3963.
And
Correct, but it's not posted on OLIS yet.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for that correction.
Well, any other questions on kind of the updates that Jeff was providing? Kind of this next bit is going to be kind of confirming the proposed process changes that came out of the conversations with the small group and out of the Lincoln City Roundtable meeting.
Well, let's keep moving.
Let's keep going. And just quick time check. We're running about 10 minutes behind, but that's cool. So just as I'm talking about some of these process updates, this is a proposal. So if we want to adjust this as a roundtable, we can. But we've got kind of two chunks of proposed changes. One is kind of leading up to June 30, and then summer, and then what happens between June 30 and December 2026. Or sorry, June 2026. So right now we've got 3 more roundtable meetings on the books. So today, May 15th in Brookings and June 17th in Florence. Jeff mentioned the public meetings. Here are the dates and locations for those. Jeff also mentioned that we've got March and May tribal table that we're kind of looking to convene. The tribal table will continue to convene in fall and kind of into next year. And Jeff also talked about different ways of engaging particular communities, providing opportunities for engagement with subject matter experts or on particular topics. That's one of the pieces of feedback we heard in Lincoln City, is that having that common base of information for all of us on the roundtable is really important, and more broadly in Oregon to have that common shared understanding is important. So ways to go about doing that. Then we're proposing a summer break where by June 30 of this year, we'll have gotten a lot of feedback from the roundtable, and that's probably a good time to hand it back to Jeff and DLCD to start synthesizing all of that together. And we're going to ask you for permission to do this by the end of the meeting today, is to start putting together kind of written concepts and start drafting what a roadmap document might look like. One of the things that we're struggling with is, well, we haven't completed all of the conversations, so it's hard to start drafting a roadmap. And yet it's hard to react in a very detailed way unless there's something to react to. So putting something on paper could really help with that conversation. So that's one of the conundrums we're wrestling with. Right now, there's a little bit of momentum towards let's get some drafting done of the complete roadmap and then pick out pieces to detail out or adjust. Fully recognizing that it's a draft and we can toss it out, but that gives us a lot of fall and spring to engage with the draft, finalizing it by June 2026, submitting to the legislature in July 2026.
And Bobby, if I can jump in there,
Of course.
the bill that's in the legislature, I believe, gives us until the end of 2026. We're aiming for middle of 26 because we think that that gives us the best opportunity to have stuff in front of the legislature before the next session. So we have a little bit of wiggle room there if we need it, but thanks.
So I'll go through these slides, and then for any members of kind of that small group that helped us vet this, I'll ask you if there's anything you want to add. But can you give me the next slide, Jeff? And this is all in your materials, but after summer, when we pick that up, the idea would be, in August, the tribal table would meet. There'd be tribal consultation on draft elements. There'd be focus groups happening in July and August. And when we come back together as a roundtable, so we'd meet in June, we'd take a break, but then in September, we'd come back as a roundtable with a complete draft of the roadmap to take a look at. All right. We'd get feedback on that. There'd be more consultation with tribes in October. And then in November, we'd come back with a second draft of the roadmap. And all along, we'd be hosting these brown bags to kind of get more information, access to subject matter experts, building that common understanding. Next slide. And then in January of 2026, we'd imagine a kind of a formal public comment period on the draft roadmap. So it would go out for about 45 days. There'd be additional tribal consultation both during and after that. In March, the roundtable would come back to kind of see what all those comments were that came in during the comment period, work with them, wrestle with them, synthesize them, talk about how to incorporate them. And then we'd be looking at kind of a May in-person presentation of the final roadmap, and then completion in June. Celebration, thank you. This is all amazing. This is everything we hoped and dreamed it would be. And then hand it to the legislature around July. So that's the rough flow. I went through that real quickly. For folks that participated in helping craft this concept, any other contexts or thoughts? John, I saw you come off mute. Did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just I'm not too familiar with the tribal table and what it does and how it works. And if the rest of the round table is in kind of a similar state, I was just wondering if it might benefit us to have a brief presentation at some future meeting from the tribal table in order to better understand just how it interacts with the roadmap process.
Yeah, Jeff, it seems like at some point, maybe after the second meeting of the tribal table, when the tribal table defines itself a little bit more, right? That's a conversation between DLCD and the tribes to define exactly what the table's for. Um, bringing back a presentation on what's going on and how it's structured could make a lot of sense for, say, maybe June or something like that. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I can aim for that. And yeah, big picture though, John, to answer maybe some basic questions, we extended the invitation to the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon, that if they were interested in having a collective conversation about topics of interest, that we're interested in having that conversation as well. I'll say that I began from the topics that were already identified in the roadmap considerations document that preceded this roundtable group that we have here. There was some really good starting material of those topics that were important and identified by tribes at that time. And then from that, building on to, what are the additional topics of conversation that we need to work through together. We're now at a point where, kind of similarly to what Bobby described with this group, there's some benefit in giving something for people to react to. So the ball is in my court to generate something for a future conversation, and again aiming for May. But the big picture point is that eventually everything daylights into the roadmap. It's just a matter of creating a space where there is an expectation that if there is information that is sensitive, or if there are topics that are really just to be held between the state and tribes, that there be a space reserved for them.
Thanks. Even just that little bit is very helpful because I guess I had in the back of my mind a mental picture of the tribal table as being an existing intergovernmental format between tribes. And so it helps to understand that it's just kind of coming along in development. I take it as a result of, or at least partially motivated by the roundtable process that we're engaged in.
Yes, yeah, it is built specifically for this effort that we are doing here. And I'll also mention that anything that's discussed at that tribal table does not change our responsibility and our relationship to intergovernmental formal consultation, and that we would expect that there will be that as part of our process as well. It's just a question of how that proceeds.
Great. Thanks a bunch. I really appreciate that. That's good. That's good knowledge to have.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
Delia and Carlin?
Yeah, thanks. There's certainly a lot left to do here, so I appreciate you trying to kind of lay out the sequence and identify some of the key steps. When you talk about on the first slide, you talked about July to August focus groups, July to August of this year. I think the fisheries engagement would fit into that space, correct?
I think that It could, yeah. When I'm talking about focus groups here, I'm talking about the work that we're doing with the other consulting group that we are trying to identify some communities to do some specific outreach to, um, and having those specific focus groups. I kind of consider if I'm going to be doing some fisheries outreach directly on the coast, that's kind of a separate deal
Oh,
than these focus groups. But I am planning to again make an appearance at commodity commissions and
okay.
be
So
available.
then I guess my suggestion, Jeff, was just that I was assuming that there was a time frame associated with that fisheries engagement. I think it would be important the first time you talk to the commodity commissions, ask them if there's a good time of year to return to talk to their membership, because of course there's seasonality involved in fishing activity. And so just
Yeah,
want to make sure that we're available at the right time to those
thank you.
audience. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
well,
Of
and that's another benefit of having a longer timeline. It's hard to orchestrate the right time for everything. But
course.
yeah,
But Jeff, it is fair to say that kind of thinking through May through August, some of those particular kind of communities of place or community of practice touch points should be happening in that timeline so that when we come back and reconvene the roundtable in September with a draft, it's informed by as many touch points as possible. It's just we're hearing from you all that you've given us a ton of feedback and we need to start putting that together. And we haven't had enough depth of conversation in spaces that are specific to a place or a topic or a community of interest. And so that's what we're trying to make space for this summer. Carlin?
Yes, for my own understanding, with tribal consultation, it really has to be a regulatory process, and this is more recommendations, is my understanding, just for my own record.
you are speaking beyond my expertise. So
Oh.
if that's,
Okay. Yeah.
I will need to take that back to our tribal liaison. But yeah,
Okay.
my understanding has been that there that we would respond to requests for consultation.
I totally get it. It is a lot. Follow-up question is, would you be willing to meet one-on-one with a tribe? Not necessarily a consultation, but if they're kind of experiencing short staff and such.
And are you referring to one of the Oregon federally recognized tribes, or we're still trying to figure out the right structure for incorporating additional tribal perspectives into this process. We do have an open process, and so there is the ability to make comment in. If you well, if you could clarify your question.
I cannot, but I could follow up once things are figured out. And my last question is, would you be able to send the participating roundtable staff representatives the information that you sent the tribes of everything we collectively went over? Unless you already have done that. I do have to mention I'm a little disorganized right now.
Yeah, if what you're referring to is the consideration document, that's
Oh,
publicly available. It's on our website, or it's on the Oregon Consensus website, actually. And
okay,
that
great.
was,
Great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Jeff, can I follow up on that with just a couple of things?
Yeah,
So Carlin, I don't know if I heard this right, but were you asking like if there's an agenda packet and materials that go to the tribal table, can the full round table get access to that same meeting packet?
Correct.
that's what I'm going to have to take back and ask. But
Yeah,
to make it
and
back to you.
Carlin, to me, part of why Jeff needs to ask that is there may be particular information that's important to the tribes that we've got to figure out if that's something to share with the full roundtable or not.
And even I think it would be helpful if it could be flexible to allow um, the tribal member roundtable representatives, if not the full roundtable. And I only say that because I think there would be kind of like a communication gap between the tribal roundtable representatives here and then the tribes are kind of way over there, and we don't have that kind of bridge. And so I think that could create some kind of maybe disorganization, inefficiencies, and such.
Yeah, the issue makes sense. And then I think, Jeff, on the kind of the idea of one-on-one conversations, the idea of meeting one-on-one with any particular group in this roundtable or outside the roundtable, that's always open, right? We're just trying to be respectful of kind of the sovereign to sovereign conversation. That's just different than having a conversation with anyone as a human in an organization of interest. So anybody can have a one-on-one conversation with DLCD. That's always an option, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. We just want to be careful of when it's a sovereign to sovereign versus a conversation, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
So how how's this, Jeff, can you go back just to the summary slide, like 2 slides?
Mhm.
Like, given we get permission to extend the deadline out, which is it's not given till it's given, you know? But we're kind of operating that we can do this. Does this plan look about right? Is there any adjustment we need to make to the plan? Because the nice part about having a plan is we can be really clear with all the different moving parts and communicating where do you need to show up when, you know, my team and Jeff's team can kind of plan everything out with catering and logistics and all that kind of stuff, and we can go really far out and just get it so it's good. But our job is to serve you and your needs. So is this serving your needs and getting to a roadmap that you all can really be happy and proud of and stand behind and say, yep, we did something right by Oregon? Julia, can I pick on you if you don't mind, just because you were a member of the kind of the subgroup that helped take an early look at this?
But what do you want me to say? Like
Yeah, is
my
there any
thoughts?
adjustments we need to make to this? Or is this feeling okay for now?
Just in terms of the overall process moving forward.
Correct, and these elements and timing and sequence.
I appreciate the conversation that we just had about individual meetings. I think it was good that we got that out into the public record because I think that people, um, what I like about this structure is I think that it creates the um, enough structure for people to understand what's coming up. But it doesn't preclude folks from one-on-one conversations or additional written communication. You know what I mean? It allows for some flexibility, while also, I think, providing clarity to folks about when we're going to have something to stick our teeth into in terms of like something in writing that we can like, be responding to. Because I do think we were at the point in the process, and I think you receive this feedback loud and clear, where we've talked a lot and we've put a lot of ideas out there into the ether, and we just kind of need a draft of something so that the conversations start feeling more real and like responsive to something, and I want to say productive, but I don't like framing it like the conversations up to this point haven't been productive. I actually think they've been extremely productive, but I think, yeah, we're at that point where DLCD staff having time to get something in writing that we can all kind of stick our teeth into and really like, have a richer discussion around and add to and change is really going to be key in this kind of next phase. Um, but yeah, but also like I think people, if you have suggestions about something you think is really missing, like put it in there for sure. But and I think we've already done this. We've started to do this, but I think continuing to communicate transparently with the roadmap, higher level detail about, say, how those community engagement processes are going with the group that you're contracting with, like I know that folks in the roundtable would probably really love to know what the plans are before they're executed, so that they can maybe provide input on that, so it's not just being informed of what's exactly happened. And I don't know if that's our role to provide input on it, but I just think it's one of those things where it would be nice for the roundtable to know what's coming in terms of community engagement and what the idea is on how to do it, um, as it's happening and like ahead of time, if possible. But at the very least, having transparency around it. I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. I can stop now, but yeah, I feel good about it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for letting me put you on the spot a little bit. Um, well, it always makes me nervous when I don't hear a ton of feedback back from people before we like say, yeah, this is our plan, we're gonna move. Um, so Joshua, I'm gonna call on you in just a second, but I do want us to, and then Chief Barrett as well. I do want to move us to start talking about diagrams. But I think after we get through this round of conversation, if folks can make sure they take a look at the proposed process updates over lunch, and if you have any other feedback, please try and bring it back by by the time you've had a chance to digest it over lunch. That way we can kind of move forward with it, and we don't have to revisit the plan too much in May. Of course, we can always make adjustments, but Joshua and then Chief Barrett, and then I see you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. I just had a quick question just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So the July 25 to February 26 reviewing draft roadmaps, is that roadmaps plural because we're going to be looking at different iterations of roadmaps and then
Correct.
we'll be submitting a final?
That's right. The idea is the rough draft would be available in September, and then we'd be iterating on that, both as a whole, but then different component parts.
Right. Okay, thanks.
All I was going to say, whoever's scheduling these meetings, May 17th was almost the start of our solstice ceremony. So just be aware that our solstice ceremonies, we go about 5 days. Equinox is about 3 days. So just thought like that. And if we do anything in August, August 3rd is our salmon ceremony. So just an FYI. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief Barrett. But the 15th is okay because it's before the 17th?
The June 17th was, yeah, 1 day before. So we got lucky.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mike?
I just put something in the chat, but the just for example, the GAO report really flags that there's some issues, specific issues associated with things like navigation safety, radar, and military kinds of activities. I fully support the idea of having a specially targeted fisheries engagement plan, but I'm just wanting to make sure that you're comfortable enough with some of these other issues that we flagged earlier without having some sort of specific conversations about those topics with those players, like Department of Defense or like people involved in longshore commerce.
Hey, Jeff, can I answer that one generally before you answer it specifically? At
Okay.
1:40 p.m., we have kind of the clarifying remaining conversations to have, Mike. And I'm hopeful that today and certainly by the end of May 15th, if there are some of those areas where we need to have more specificity before we go into the summer, like I'd like this group to identify those now. Right? So you can ask the question, hey, have we had enough conversation around navigation safety? That's a perfect one to lift up today so that DLCD and the roundtable can wrestle with it on, yes, we need to have that conversation before June 17th, or we can have it in September. Go for it, Jeff.
I was just going to point out an unfortunate reality that we may or may not be able to have some conversations with some of the federal agencies about this topic. That there are some real barriers to that right now. There have been some conversations before. I think that our roadmap can nevertheless have it identified as something that may be part of our research agenda or part of the conversations that belong on our waypoint path, even if we can't have them in the next handful of months.
And so, Jeff, like that exact back and forth, like getting some of that this afternoon would probably be super helpful, right? And then pinning it down in May would be ideal.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, cool. Okay, action item on this one is take a look at the process memo that went out in the materials. If you have any other feedback, please try and bring that after lunch. You can email it to Jeff or myself, or just bring it back when we come back. And then Jeff, I think I covered the timeline on this well enough already. Maybe you ready to move to diagrams?
Sure. Yeah, I just, for those watching on YouTube who may not have seen it, and I don't think it's in the meeting materials, but this is that same cartoon as you've seen before, just a little bit stretched out. So you can see what we've got in our minds. Okay, before we get to diagrams, we're going to talk about work groups. So we've got, about, I think, what, 20 minutes or so, maybe? I don't know how far we are behind now, Bobby, but I do want to give
if you could squish it to 10:15, you'd be awesome.
I'll do my best. So I do want to flag, we have our research agenda and coordination working group, and we have our community benefit and other enforceable agreements working group. Each one of these groups has met twice. We have more conversations to be had, though. We're not to the point where we are ready to make recommendations here. I have to admit a little bit of a dropped ball in just scheduling these conversations. There's been a lot, but I'm going to try to get those going. I know I sent out a scheduled poll for the research agenda group. I was hoping we could do something by the 25th, but that suddenly seems really tight to make happen. So I might send out a fresh schedule poll for that. For the research agenda group, there are some threads that I'm trying to pull to make our next conversation more useful. Talking with Karina, who's been leading an effort through the Ocean Policy Advisory Council Science and Technical Advisory Committee to develop a research agenda. One of the things that's on our plate is actually already being dealt with in a parallel process. And so trying to dovetail those together and maybe adopt that as part of our process when the time is right. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of dancing around this idea of, should Oregon try to build like a research collaborative like has been started up on some of the East Coast states and is interstate. California has been given money by their legislature to start up their own research collaborative that is multi-party, that includes universities and tribes and state agencies and affected groups to try to build a consensus around the science that can then be useful in future permitting decisions, and trying to figure out, does that make sense for us, and what would it take, and how would we do it? So conversations to be had. We want to bring in some people who may have some experience that can help guide us through that. It's a scheduling thing. I'm working on it. Similarly, with the community benefit and other enforceable agreements, it's on me to try to schedule a next meeting. But where we have left it is we have a lot of interesting questions around how we define communities in regard to those benefits and enforceable agreements. We have some open questions about what like the book of agreements might look like and how to make it enforceable. And I'm doing some work behind the scenes to get some help with some like legal and policy guidance on how we might be able to have a strong position in the state for that. But the next step is for me to schedule a meeting that includes a panel of experts. And I've been given some names by our group of people that we ought to bring in, trying to find a couple more so that we can just learn from expertise from other states. And similarly to what I'm going to show you in a minute from our spatial planning group, the purpose with both of these work groups, as I see it, is to develop some concise recommendations that we can consider for bringing into the roadmap. And Ramfis, I see your hand. Would you like to add to conversation here?
And I appreciate the update and the overview. I think captured it well. Jeff, just want to sort of note here, yeah, if you need any support or assistance, I think just feel free to reach out. Like I think Rachel and myself, Rachel Lucine, I think are willing and able to help coordinate and put meetings together.
Okay.
Just know that they're, I don't want to speak for Rachel. I know she's on this call, but willing to add capacity around helping scheduling and convene in coordination with you. So
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I'll be in touch. It'll be
Yes,
great.
and I'll just second that. Yeah, I'm happy to help. So please reach out if you need any help with coordinating.
Thank you. Thank you. That's where we are with those working groups. Stay tuned. Now, our spatial planning work group has a recommendation that I wanted to daylight here. There is a draft that is in the meeting material packet that you've all received. And what I want to do here is give an overview of the main points of this recommendation that's coming through, as well as highlight some areas of kind of caveats and concerns that are coming with this as well, and then just see what conversation it generates. So the kernel of the working group and the reason that we convened it was to ask the question of, the federal agency through BOEM did their own siting process out in federal waters to try to identify least conflict areas that were economically viable and technically viable for developing offshore wind. And they came up with those 2 wind energy areas that ultimately did not move forward to leasing. We have the opportunity now, with the period of time that we are in, hearing the feedback from that process that came before, asking the question, what if the state led our own sea space suitability analysis that would be inclusive of not only federal waters, but incorporate the territorial sea that is within our jurisdiction, and also onshore and estuarine areas. So thinking about, if you put an array offshore in federal waters, because the state of Oregon has this thing called a GLD, that's within our review authority. So if we have a policy that could complicate siting out there, it's useful to know that ahead of time. And that gives us a reason to be looking out there. Things like our viewshed policies, our fisheries protection policies, and our ecological protection policies that we talked about in February. So if we had a spatial planning process that included both the marine areas and coastal zone, to think about when you have cables coming into shore, and when you are trying to connect to the grid, could we have that holistic look and have it be a state-led effort rather than a federally led effort? And through this effort, identify kind of the red, yellow, green areas out there where there are areas that are less suitable or inconsistent that we can already identify would be inconsistent with state policies and therefore kind of a heavy lift. These ones that are kind of in the middle, depending on the conditions and further information that you might get, or whether they look like they are likely consistent, assuming that no new information comes in that we challenge that. In our conversations, we recognize that the federal government through BOEM retains leasing authority on the Outer Continental Shelf in federal waters. And so ultimately, this is their process. However, like California did, like New York did, they did sea space suitability assessments that extended out into federal waters. And we had some conversations with BOEM, Andy and myself, a couple of months ago, where we raised this idea. And the feedback that we got was, well, certainly if the state provides us some information about future constraints, we're going to take that into account because we're trying to manage risk. And so that's where we see the opportunity here. We, in the recommendation, recognized that any spatial planning effort should be guided by the same goals that are articulated in the roadmap, such as protection of existing ecosystems, cultural resources, viewscapes, traditional ocean uses, coastal economies, and tourism. To integrate an ecosystem-based approach that takes into account climate change mitigation and adaptation and disaster risk management, that we need to go in with an understanding of how much space is needed for viable development. We're not just out there looking for places that can't go, that there needs to be an intent to find areas that may be suitable. But without having that as a base motivation, we won't succeed in finding areas that could work. To kind of similarly to the BOEM-led process, be considering those interactions, potential conflicts between activities and uses and interests for arrays, telecom cables, et cetera, and then have a process that can adapt as information comes in. One thing I do want to clarify, though, is again, talking with Andy about this, who has been part of the territorial sea plan effort for marine energy, where we did create zones in the ocean where it's, this is a site suitability area, this is a place of no-go, but we're not really doing that. We are not putting our own state zoning on federal waters. The way he was considering it was more of an inventory. Let's take a look at the policies that we have and let's project them into space and see how they interact and how they intersect, and are the things that we can already know, such as how visual resources might be affected, or whether there are layers of like nursing grounds for important fisheries or important fish uses that we can refine and hone, but also expand the area that BOEM originally looked at to include the entirety north to south of the state line out to sea, and then also taking into account that there is that connection to shore that needs to be considered. The recommendation also flags that DLCD should be engaging and coordinating with federal agencies such as the NOAA NCOS group that helped BOEM with their modeling effort and had all of those kind of stacked layers trying to create that heat map of where suitability might be. And NCOS came to some of our meetings. They've since, they're no longer participating at the moment, but we're looking at, how can we work with the data that they have and the modeling that they've done to help our effort. We also talked about integrating our effort and coordinating with California and Washington to make sure that we're being efficient, to learn lessons from other states who have done some similar planning work and incorporate their best practices. And that if we do this process for Oregon, that we need to make sure that we're incorporating multiple forms of knowledge and inviting the participation of tribes, universities, government agencies, private business, and those who have lived experiences, and find ways to incorporate that information into our process. So that is the heart of the recommendation. But I do want to acknowledge that there are some reservations about moving forward with the state-led spatial planning process, and that's worth flagging as well. One of the things that I heard back in response was that this isn't just about developers having a need, that we really ought to be acknowledging that if we're doing a spatial planning process, it's because the state is interested in having this option for renewable energy development, and that it's not just about what the developers need, but it's also about what the state needs, and that makes sense to me as well. It was also, the point was made multiple times. Chief Barrett, would you like to jump in before? Please go ahead.
I'd just like to say that, we talked to Boehm a lot about um, the Hasidic banks, to stay away from the Hasidic banks, and they didn't seem to listen to us about it. And so another angle we could use is, usual and custom areas of the tribes, because it could affect the California current. I mean, those are mountaintops that used to be mountaintops that are probably were islands back in the day, and more than likely we utilize those islands. And that's why one of the reasons we told them to please stay away from them. And they went right straight to the southern end of it. So, relooking at these areas might be a good idea for us as tribes, let alone the view sheds and all the other, um, the spiritual places we go and pray, and all of those places that we can do. They didn't seem to care because there is no universal consultation policy. And that's another thing that we're working on with the governor. The task force is working on a consultation policy. So I know I'm opening up a can of worms here, but it's somebody needs to listen that we can't mess with the California current, because that's which feeds all these fish and our returning salmon and our lamprey. So that was our main concern, and hopefully we can look at this. If you guys need more information, get a hold of me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Jeff, can I ask a question here too? Just kind of what we can most use from the roundtable. Do you want to articulate more of what the recommendation has to say before I kind of start asking ourselves what kind of feedback might be helpful, or you feel like you're pretty good?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Bobby.
Sorry, do you have more you want to present before I start
This is the
asking
last
you?
piece.
Okay.
Just
So-
really flagging that without industry participating and without setting a clear goal and maybe even a duration so that it doesn't stretch on for many years, that there are people who would not be in favor of this happening, just having some concerns. And then there was also a concern about, what could we support without federal agency participation? So just some questions that are maybe worth some additional just discussion or reactions from folks.
Gotcha. Yeah. So for the roundtable members, like just as a reminder, out of the roundtable, this idea of, hey, marine spatial planning seems of interest. And then it went to, okay, there's a number of things of interest. Where could the roundtable spin off a work group and actually come up with some strategic recommendations? The Marine Spatial Planning Group did that. And so this is, Jeff, I think this is kind of the first roundtable recommendation out of the gate, yeah? And so there's right?
Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah. And so it's a draft, it's a proposal. So there's questions about, is the content right? Is it about the right level of elevation and detail? Because the next step would be to kind of take this recommendation, and whatever you see kind of as a concept draft in the roadmap, like this could be part of that in May. It's certainly not finalized. We can wrestle with it. We can throw it completely out. We can detail it. We can nuance it. We can do all sorts of things between May and September, and even September to December. But this is an example of kind of what a recommendation that this group could produce looks like. So for the feedback right now, Jeff, what's the most useful kind of format or level of feedback, given we're not going to have time to get into the detail of too much of the substance right now, but we could in May? How do you want feedback, and when and where?
Suppose we probably ought to we should have talked about this before we got into it. Just want to hear what folks think, I guess. Are there serious reservations that we ought to take it back to the work group and talk about? Is it, what were people's reactions as they read it in the meeting materials? But you're right. The idea would be like, let's carry this into a draft and continue to talk about it, refine it. And if it comes to pass that the more we think about it, the less it seems like the right idea, that could be an outcome as well. But I think it also is true that we knew coming into this process that we may not have consensus on everything. We're just trying to gather all the perspectives that we can.
Yeah, yeah. So I think Nicole and then Julia, in the spirit of, hey, feel free to comment on some of the substance of this, but most importantly, like how should the roundtable wrestle with this topic to get it to a point where we feel good about it, say in September. But go for it, Nicole, and then Julia.
Sure, thanks. So these types of mapping processes are things that we tend to be in opposition to because we've been involved with many of them. I could name off many that use this red, yellow, green process, starting with the decrep process in California to the BLM's solar siting process to processes we've done at the state level before. And the reason is because these tend to be activities of trying to prove a negative, which in the case of energy development, there is no negative. There is no impact scenario. And what tends to end up happening is projects need to be viable. They need to be put in the yellow area or sometimes in the red area. And then folks use that as a way to appeal and oppose projects going forward. I also would just say that in terms of timing, the earliest you would ever get representatives from the offshore wind industry to be ready to sit down to have this conversation would be 2029. And so I wouldn't hold your breath that you will get industry participation in a conversation like this because the offshore wind industry is going to want to, and by then things will have changed in the industry. There will be new technologies, there will be new needs, there'll be different considerations. So the folks who are going to want to participate in a conversation like this are going to want to have had some time to get to know the market and the need and the specific opportunities before they engage in a conversation like this. So if you want to have this be a recommendation of the roadmap, my suggestion would be to say the timing of this process should be driven by when the state is ready to move forward with a lease and when the state has positive market signals from investors to do the work. But I can guarantee you, you will not get any attention until, at a minimum, early or 2029, assuming there isn't a third Trump term. And I say that with all like honesty. We have been involved at the very highest levels of these conversations with the offshore wind industry, and there will be in Oregon in the next 4 years. So, yeah, I see that, Ramfis. I wish that is a dream. That would be a dream come true for me. But so I just, having been through this, I sat at the tables and did this green, yellow, red. And for BLM, for example, it has resulted in 0 new projects being built. For DCRAP, same thing in California. So we just tend to have a really strong opposition to the red, yellow, green mapping effort because here, I mean, just in the conversation we had today, I heard one thing about looking for areas that are appropriate for development, but the rest of it is these are all the negatives that you have to prove before you can move forward with the project. And there are just no negatives, and there's just no way to come up with a perfect place that isn't going to have some impact to anyone. The overlay of all the interests that come to the table will always be a red or a yellow. And so I just, I think we should put a pin in this, maybe make it a recommendation for a future time when there's a more positive market signal coming from the industry. But I just don't think it's something that we should be spending time and energy on here in the next 3-4 years.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nicole. And I mean, one of the things we could think about with the recommendations are just how do we capture these various viewpoints? And then what does the state need to say in the roadmap? And what the state needs to say should be informed by those various viewpoints and pushing back and forth. So, Nicole, you don't need to answer this now, but you caught my attention with the industry might not be ready to sit down until 2029 with a clear market signal. I was like, is that true for the supply chain conversation? Is that true for wildlife impacts conversation? And if that's true for like all the things we're talking about in the roundtable, and we so want industry perspectives, we're gonna need to wrestle with that one a bit, eh?
Yeah, I mean, I've given the spiel other places, but happy to do so now. But
We don't need to do it now, but
no, I mean, just in general, I'll say the impacts of Trump's executive order on wind energy are not just about offshore wind. Our wind energy industry is entirely paralyzed right now. There are no new projects, even on private lands, being built. And so, the types of companies that are investing in offshore wind in the United States are large European utilities, and they have pulled out all their investments in the United States. We've lost over $300,000 in membership dues already this year from European partners exiting the US market. If you're a large European utility and you have a responsibility to your ratepayers on how you're spending that money, it doesn't look very good right now to be investing in the United States with the threats of tariffs and visas and everything. So this isn't just about offshore wind. This is about the entire renewable energy supply chain. It is a minimum of 4 years to get a new gas turbine right now from supply chain. It's all of the turbine components are manufactured in Europe, and there's at least a minimum of 30% tariff on those. I can't, I mean, it is not like, it is just not possible that in the next 4 years we have any market interest in the state. So I think that's what you should be thinking about in terms of when to be timing some of the things that you're talking about doing here. Like, let's not waste the state's time when in 4 years new technologies and new entrants to the market and a totally new view of the needs of the state could come around. And do a bunch of spatial planning that's not going to mean anything when we have a different view of the world.
yeah. Yeah, it kind of leads to that question of it's hard to plan without really clear goals. And if conditions are changing rapidly, what do those scenarios look like? Julia, and then Ramphis, and then if it's okay, we wanted to present this recommendation just to give you a flavor of what a recommendation could look like. And we can queue up more time on this one in particular in May, but I do want us to start thinking about diagrams. Go for it, Julia.
I was going to initially I was going to say something about the onshore and estuary, impacts, but because I didn't remember hearing you bring it up, but I'm seeing it on the slide, so that's perfect. It needs to be in there. I think that what Nicole's highlighting is important to inform how we try to be as nuanced as possible about kind of like the sequencing, like if this, then that, right? You know what I mean? It's like I do think that it's a useful exercise, but it has to be framed in a way that I think has everyone under the shared understanding that there is no zero impact option. And if this is something we decide we want to do, we're trying to figure out how to do the least amount of impact, but zero impact is not an option. I still feel like whether or not it makes sense to do it very soon or 3 or 4 years from now, the recommendation about the state having influence in this process and not just solely relying on a federal agency that frankly a lot of folks, particularly in Oregon, don't trust to get it right. You know what I mean? So I think that we do have, I think it would be really important for us to do something like this process at the time where it makes the most sense and can be informed by the realities on the ground. So, but I want to really honor like what Nicole's bringing up in terms of let's try to provide that nuance in this recommendation for how to, do this in a way that will be the best use of the state's resources and time.
And Jeff, it just seems like the idea of if there's information created, what's the shelf life of that information is important
Yeah.
to know.
This is making me think about the diagram conversation to come, which is how do we make the best use of the like pre-siting, pre-leasing phase that we're kind of in and will seem to be staying in for the next however many years. And if there isn't benefit, if it's not worth our time to be proactively applying our policies and thinking about, I take your point that there is no zero impact option, but then the question is, how flexible are our policies to allow like an acceptable amount of impact in certain areas? Are there areas where some amount of impact is more acceptable than less? That, red, there may be few things that are truly red, and there may just be a lot of yellow. Is there benefit in having those conversations sooner rather than later because they're policy driven, not necessarily technology driven? Or if not, what are the other ways that we can make best use of our time?
Yeah, good questions, Jeff. Thank you. Ramphis.
Yeah, no, I just want to appreciate the this initial recommendation. I think this I know it's not perfect, but I think that's the purpose of this conversation is to get various different stakeholders to take a look at this and sort of offer its feedback and find areas where we could identify common ground where it could be improved. So I do want to sort of commend the working group drafting this. I think it's a good first step. I also kind of agree with Nicole's points here. And I hope as we take a step back on all recommendations that we're looking at, however we land with these recommendations, that they're being paired with, other potential policies or market driven components, such as like having some kind of off-taker agreement component or a potential procurement that would still protect ratepayers. So I think those are things that I hope we can discuss. With that said, I think my general big question here that I think will come up thematically for all these recommendations is uh, does this require a state bill or policy, or is this something that could be done through agency rulemaking or agency process? Two, would it require funding? So what's the price tag? So I think many of us are familiar here with any kind of policies we're trying to pass. It's not the great idea that's the barrier. It's the funding that's the barrier. So I think my question to the working group as they take this back, it's what is the potential price tag to do this and do this in the way as folks envision? How would it be funded? Is it from the state general funding? Is there a revenue generating strategy to fund this? I think those are just kind of my questions, and I'm not just picking on just this topic. I think this would be relevant on all topics. So I think I just want to be clear out if we're going to make recommendations actionable. I think it'd be helpful to know again, yeah, dollar figure. Does it need a state bill? Can this just be done with existing resources, or do we need to allocate new resources, and do we need to pair revenue generation idea? Beyond that, I think some of the um, things that Nicole's flagged, like I hope there can be a continued conversation here how we bridge the gap. But I do want to again commend folks with this initial recommendation. I think it's a good start for us to work with.
Yeah. Thanks, Ramphis. I heard on that we've got for any recommendation we have, it's how do you make it implementable? Budget is one expression of value. Like, is it worth it? Like, what's the benefit? And then there's this interrelation. It's like you can't just look at this recommendation irregardless of all the other things. But any, so I think I want to move us on from this. Jeff, I'm thinking for this recommendation, at least with this conversation, it did do what we wanted it to, which is we got roundtable feedback. We had a space that let folks go into detail. We brought it back to the roundtable with enough specificity that it triggered reactions in a really productive way. And now we've got next steps. So I liked what that did. So if folks are feeling ready, let's switch gears here a little bit and go back to the big picture of kind of thinking through the roadmap diagrams. And then Jeff, if we can do that, take the time to really explain them, like 15 minutes or so. And I think what I'm gonna do is the breakout reports I might move to after lunch and eat into our exit ramp strat or our conversation a little bit just to make sure we get really good feedback on these diagrams. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, if I could request just a few minutes before we jump in. We've been sitting here for an hour and a half.
Yeah, do you guys want to take a 5-minute break or so? 10-minute break? All right, let's do 5 minutes and come back at 11:37
Thank you.
and 30 seconds. Perfect. We'll see y'all in a little bit. 5 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everyone had a good break. Jeff, you get a good stretch? Good.
Yep.
Good. Some good stuff to hear, Sophia, in the chat. I don't know if you see it kind of on the spatial planning recommendations. So let's make sure we grab that for the notes on this. Cool, thank you. All right, Trevor, are you ready?
Yep, we still have 50 on. Comes out to about 8 per group.
Okay.
And I don't know if we have our moderators on, but I do have Brett's group, Sophia's group, Cynthia's group, Lisa's group, my own, and then Ava's group ready to break out.
Sounds good. So before I hand it to Jeff to kind of introduce the diagrams, any of the small group moderators, you all have any questions? You've got your slide decks and your things for notes. Any questions you all have? All right, you're ready. All right, Jeff, take it away. Tell us what you did to update some diagrams based on what we've been hearing the last few months.
All right. Well, I think in pictures. Pictures tell me a lot. And as those of you who were there with us in November in Florence, we started this whole shebang with a visioning exercise where we said, let's transport ourselves into the future, to a future where we have offshore wind and we don't regret it and it was a good decision, and a future where we don't have it and it was a good decision. And then let's look backward and let's identify those waypoints that got us there along the path. And out of that, we were trying to understand, where might those exits be and how might we come back on? As we talked about in our previous topic, what are those things that have to come before other things? And from that, and the notes that were generated from our November discussion, I came to December with this really messy looking thing. And it was a first cut, and I told you I was going to try to make another. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. And so I want to walk you through how I've adjusted this and expanded it and separated it by phase. And then we want to ask you all to break up into groups and give us your reactions, give us your amendments, tell us what we're missing, what we need to add or change. But I'll just jump right into it and show you. First, I'm going to do a really quick run, and then I'm going to go back up. What you can see here, this green dot here is federal siting and planning. So it relates to this first dot here from the original. And then similarly, if I keep moving forward, now we wave along and there's leasing. And then the third step, get this to permitting. Then we have construction. And then we have operation. At the very end, some 30 years down the road is a question of, do we do this all again? Do we renew a lease? Do we let a project that's out there keep operating? So when we think about early recommendations for this roadmap that came from what came before our process was this idea we want to think about the whole life cycle. And so what I was attempting to do here was take that feedback from November and some of the conversations that we've been having around effects of concern, around policies that we want to see, and the gaps that we might have, and then map them all out on this timeline. I also want to point out that when I look at something like this, there's another term that I've been hearing, phase gates, that we've talked about exit ramps as this idea of if there's something that we don't have that we need in order to move forward, let's pull off to the side of the road and try to meet that need before we move forward again. I think that you could look at the phases of offshore wind development and have each one of these green circles also represent a point of, by the time we get to that circle, we want to have all these waypoints along the way with us. And if we don't, that might be a reason to not proceed past this gate. So as you're looking at this diagram, that's another frame I'd like you to think about. But here we are. This is our first piece of the path. I would say this represents where we are today. We are not in a place where we have leasing. We are in this pattern for the next 4 years where we're trying to figure out what pieces can we arrange to make the state ready or more ready for offshore wind. In the blue boxes, you can see two ideas that I've been starting to talk about here this morning that are coming out of the working group conversations and just what's been happening in other states. One of those is the one we just talked about of should we do any kind of state-led spatial planning to pre-identify where those constraints might be and essentially help along any next federally led or next federal siting and leasing process that happens to put our own stamp on it. Is that something we can and should do in the near term? There's also this idea that we've been talking about since the start of we need to build our own research agenda. We need to get our arms around what our science needs are early that we're going to need way down the road when it's time for permitting. And let's start working on those today. And there's also this question of should we build a science collaborative so that we're trying to build a group consensus to work together on having a shared understanding of that science that eventually is going to lead to decisions. And what I've gathered here, these bullets that I have, those relate to some of the bullets that were here in the original. We had a lot of things that we wanted to know before we moved forward with siting and planning. And the idea was, well, maybe that can be folded into this idea of kind of our scientific research knowledge base process. So we know we've wanted a baseline of the before condition, data for our ocean, the California current, that a NEPA process, like an environmental impact statement, have scoping that happens early to identify what our information needs are. There's been, from early on, this idea we want to know what the fisheries effects are early in the process. Is that something that can be brought in? Answering those key effect questions early, incorporating indigenous and traditional knowledge into our research and our science collective, collaborating with California and Washington, and then making sure that it's reflective of the best technology and practices that we currently have for floating offshore wind. So those are two big boxes of potential that I think we could talk about whether those are things that the state should be investing in and trying to build as ways to make use of this time. Other things that are on this early path, waypoints, engagement with tribal communities, and I think that that is still to be defined of what that engagement looks like at this stage in the process. We also heard that a very early step, and maybe this bullet from our earlier conversation, maybe that needs to move even further back, is this connection to the state's energy strategy and answering that fundamental question of, do we need the power? Do we want to invest in all the rest that comes with opening up offshore wind as a possibility? We've heard from Governor Kotek's statements that she wants to see offshore wind on the table as one way to meet our needs. We're also seeing out of the energy strategy that Odo is putting together that depending on how you do the model, you may or you may not see as much demand for offshore wind specifically. And then as we heard Ranfis mention, maybe there are alternative ways to have different procurement structures or what have you. The whole point being to build that market signal that Nicole was talking about. That seems to be a really important early step. You talked about public engagement and education being something where you need to start early, and there are already efforts out there happening right now, trying to build the awareness and the knowledge base. So that would need to continue. What I put in red here, the PEIS, this was one that was identified during our November meeting to say we need to have a programmatic environmental impact statement that takes a look at the entire California current, that looks at the full development potential for off of Oregon and sets a cumulative limit, helps us really understand how much would be too much, what do we really know about those big systemic effects. And there was a desire for that PEIS to happen early. We know that that was a request made of BOEM during their siting process, and the way that their process has worked in California, what they do is issue their leases first, and then they do a programmatic EIS of the leases they just issued before they issue any individual permits to build anything in those lease areas. So for California, they had 5 leases that were given out, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Speculatively. And then now they're doing the cumulative look to say, if we built in all those areas, would it be okay? And then they want to use the results of that PEIS to then help them in their permitting decisions down the line. If we want something different than that structure, then I don't know how much power we have to tell the federal government to do their PEIS sooner, but that's an area of conversation. But a question I also have is, could we address that same question of how much is too much and what are our cumulative limits through this research agenda and a science collaborative? There are ways to answer that question. Policy revisions to address gaps, that relates to the conversations we've been having over the last several months, and taking this time to do any necessary updates. Port infrastructure and supply chain readiness plan. So that could include doing an assessment of what those needs would be and where the opportunities are. And you can see that in the other opportunities to consider box, taking some ideas from the main example of some supply chain assessments that they did and a registry of available industries and businesses in Oregon, looking for some interstate or international opportunities, and figuring out where those capacity investment needs are. The last point on that critical path is getting greater clarity on what the framework for legal enforceable agreements would be. And this comes out of the conversations that we've been having here in the roundtable, and what I've been hearing as a clear desire to have not only accountability for projects that are in the water, but accountability for any agreements that are made with communities, with user groups, with labor workforce, to figure out how we can bring those in a formal way. And again, down here in the box, these are those kind of, should these be put on the critical path? Are they other opportunities that we might reach for that are low-hanging fruit for investment from the state in time or resources? So that supply chain work, transmission planning and investment, building out what might be needed or where there are complementary build outs that could help the coast generally for resiliency, but then also be compatible with offshore wind. There's an idea where we could study the community investment needs to where if we build an industry, let's understand ahead of time what the complementary investments are going to be in the community so that that can help with those benefit conversations, that the state can better understand, that local communities can better understand what it's going to take to house and support the industry that could grow. And then on the power economics side, that do we need the power and how, whether we as a state can be exploring or pursuing a regional power market, a state procurement authority, or other kind of things that will add some certainty. to reduce those power purchase barriers and provide that market signal, looking for more input there. And then improving state agency capacity sooner rather than later so that we can start building that expertise to participate in the research agenda and be ready for permitting.
Hey, Jeff, just quick time check. We spent about 15 minutes on that one phase. Can I give you a hard stop at noon? Just and then again, just to orient people to what these are, not the specifics. We'll have more time to discuss. But we're going to run out of time for people to actually give us feedback.
Okay, got it.
Thanks.
All right, so after we're done with that pre-stage, we're still kind of at a pre-stage because it's before leasing has happened, and there are some things that repeat. The idea of the welcome from the state with the market signal and do we need the power, whether we should consider a pilot project. And, I've been hearing that maybe is not the most attractive from the industry. The research agenda should be underway and developed, that there be some consideration of different kind of ownership arrangements. Public engagement stays there. The PEIS question stays there. This idea that if we do a state-led spatial planning, that we put our stamp on it and identify those areas that truly are red and make sure that those are not brought into the leasing conversation. Maybe starting to identify who the affected communities could be associated with lease areas to start organizing conversations around benefits. And then as part of leasing already, it's required that there be fishery engagement plans and tribal engagement plans, but just clearly identifying those as points on the path, as well as tribal consultation and protecting their interests. There could be an exploration of co-stewardship agreements, and we'd be interested in seeing what that might look like. Port infrastructure and supply chain plans, and then really, before you get into leasing, making sure that the risks from that action are responsibly managed, and that's like the characterization work that happens. And then you can see there are some other opportunities here in the corner. After leasing occurs, this is that about 5-year period where a developer has purchased rights to an area. Now they're going to study what they just bought and try to develop the permits that then this is the state's other bite of the apple, where we get to have a review authority at that permitting stage. And so the main points on the path that we really understand the effects of the project and that those uncertainties and risks are being responsibly managed through various means that we've talked about here. That there be consideration of the port infrastructure needs and supply chain development that would support any project that's permitted. Public engagement, again, that there be a clear process and expectation for accountability in the event of harm, and that there be a decommissioning plan that has a return to nature expectation. Tribal consultation, protection of interests and agreements, and then those enforceable agreements with affected communities that could include benefit agreements, labor agreements, or other types of agreements, such as with fishing groups, as it makes sense. Culminating in a joint agency review, which is really the state's big opportunity to say, is this consistent with our policies or is it not? And once the permit decision is made, that's kind of the end of the state's official role, but there are still these waypoints that we can identify along the way, that if you haven't secured your supply chain, you can't move forward. You need your power purchase agreements to secure the project viability so that it actually moves forward after permits are obtained. That there be that community support for workforce, not only training, but for their community needs, that the project support infrastructure is there and ready, any port development, transmission, community support, that there be some sort of ongoing engagement that happens between the state, tribes, public, and that those enforceable agreements are in effect and working. And finally, that your project designs stay consistent with what was in your permit. Then you get into the operation years where something is actually built, it's out there, it's working. And that's where you get into this adaptive management process where you are requiring information to be collected and you have a process to learn about what you are seeing and then adjust if need be. that those enforceable agreements remain in place and operational, that there's clear accountability in the event of harm, there's ongoing engagement, and then some point down the road, we get an opportunity to weigh in again and to say, is this something we want to keep going? Is the harm too much and we don't want to do it anymore? Or do we keep going? So those are the main waypoints.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll just open it up to see if there's any clarification questions. Could you actually put the slides back up real quick, Jeff?
Sure, yeah.
My first clarification questions is, do the colors of the waypoint dots mean anything?
Well, yeah, I think so. Still trying to sort that out. So blue is just general, like we want these to be in place before we move through the next gate. But there may not be an enforceable policy that requires. If it's orange, I see that as we really can't move forward without this because there's either an enforceable policy or it represents something that we would call an exit ramp in the way that the process that preceded us identified these things as if we don't have this, we don't want to move forward yet. In yellow, those are some where out of the CAP conversations we've been having, I wonder if there are opportunities to amend or strengthen our state policies to say, this isn't just a nice to have along the way, that we might actually have a role in requiring these or evaluating these as part of our state review. But to be honest, I'm still kind of sorting out the color code.
Okay, sounds good. Any other clarification questions on like how to interpret this, what the different things are, before we send you to small groups? Clear enough? Kevin, Karina, how's it clear enough? Do you feel like you've got enough orientation to give specific feedback to us? Kevin, how you feeling?
One nostril above the water, but I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot of information. I almost feel like I want a little legend for your dots, that you just gave, or like maybe you could put in the chat so we could see it, like yellow, or just quickly, just as a reference, if that's easy to do.
I will
This
try.
is Nicole. Just a clarifying question. What is the purpose of the small group meetings? Is it to provide feedback on this document?
Correct.
Okay. And then sorry, I had a call come in. I think at the point, Jeff, that you were describing the purpose of the document, is this a piece that you propose being in the roadmap, or is this just driving the conversation?
I think it's possible that it could be. If we can identify that these are the waypoints on the path, that if we're going to walk the path to offshore wind, this is how in Oregon we think it would be done right. That this is one way to pictorially represent kind of the big picture of what the roadmap then in text would expand on and talk about what each one of these points mean
Got it.
and identify actions.
Okay, thank you.
So just to say that even more strongly, Jeff, if we do this right, this diagram could be the central part of the roadmap and be something that going out into public meetings or conversations with others you use as a guidepost to make sure that, like, hey, all the topics are covered in the right sequence at the right stages. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I would love to take this to my public meeting next week.
I mean,
some version of it.
Are you open to feedback about making this a little less prescriptive? Because some of the things are ongoing. They don't fit nicely in discrete time periods, and they could extend beyond permitting, and they could. So it feels like the information's there. It's just the way it's presented feels a little like point in time and a little constricted. So there could be some better visual tools.
That's amazing feedback, Nicole. Exactly that kind of feedback is what we want.
And as specific as you can be, I would love it. Yeah.
Karina, what other kind of orientation can we get you? Jeff dropped in, or Cynthia dropped in the legend here.
Great.
Okay. All right, Sophia, do you want to give kind of the breakout group instructions, and then we'll send folks off. I think let's we're gonna adjust time, so we'll bring people back at 12:35 to do public comment, and then we'll do full group report outs when we come back for lunch. So that's the only adjustment I'll make on your instructions, but I'll let you give the instructions and we'll send people along.
Thank you, Bobby. So yeah, we will like split as we usually do all the roundtable members into smaller groups. Each one of the smaller groups will have a moderator, and each one of the groups will have a slide deck with these diagrams that Jeff and Bobby and everyone else just saw and explained. So we will have that for each one of the groups so we can have the conversation. And we will have 40 minutes to just have the conversation. We can add notes in that slide deck. We can change, we can move. Each one of the groups they are free to do whatever they want with each one of the slide decks that we will have. And then we will come back as a whole group and we will report more or less what we have changed, or if we have main comments or general comments to share with the whole group for the next 20 minutes after that. Did I miss something, Bobby? I think those are the general instructions for each one of the breakout rooms that we will be getting into after lunch.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I just dropped the prompts here. I think at this point, make sure your topics are there. Like if you care about something, there should be something that points to that topic in there. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. So Trevor, let's go ahead and open up those breakouts. I've asked Jeff to kind of pop in and float around. So if you have a content question on like what is meant by this, please just tech or ping me and I'll find a way to get a hold of Jeff. Jeff, if you can have your cell phone next to you, that way if I get a ping, I can let you know where I need to send you. All right, Trevor, take us away.
Okay. All right, everybody. I set it up so it automatically assigns everybody to a breakout room. So I'm going to click the button here, and everything goes well. We should all be kicked to our spots.
And just as a quick reminder, Trevor, before you do that, just rules of engagement, ground rules. Remember the breakouts. If you're a member of the broader community or public, ask that you kind of be in listen mode, make some notes. We'll have public comment right after this, and we'd love to hear from you then. But you're just kind of observing the breakouts, even though it's a smaller group. Okay.
Yeah, and I guess with that, I'll just say I randomly assigned all the roundtable members groups kind of equally throughout the 6, and then all else, public members, etc., kind of did a mix as well. So,
perfect.
Okay, here we go. All right.
Trevor, do you have a room?
Yeah, I was just making sure everybody went. Laurel Hillman, let's see. I'll get Laurel here assigned. I'll get her.
And then Jeff, we might want to pause the recording for just a little bit.
Brett.
Okay. And then as soon as you do that, I'll share my screen if I can, just to get the question box up. Second to do that, everybody. Thank you. All right. And Trevor, you can see my screen okay, yeah?
I can.
Lovely. All right. And so for anybody, anytime, feel free to grab that QR code on your phone. Just submit a question, submit a comment. We'll make sure we get it. But let's go ahead and open public comment. If you can just introduce yourself a little bit, and then talk as much as you need to, but ideally about in that minute and a half, 3-minute range. And Susanna, why don't we go to you first, and then Amy, I'll go to you next. We're glad you're here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I gotcha. Welcome.
So I'm in Astoria. I've looked at the territorial sea plan. A couple of comments. For Camp Riley, it has to be far enough offshore so live ammunition doesn't knock out the windmills. So that's one comment. Another comment, I don't hear anything about the Earth cascading subduction zone quake. A lot of it is in the Gorda Plate area that is at the very end of its release cycle. And another comment I did put in there about, have you studied what the Pac Wave group have gone through on outreach to fisheries? They had a really good outcome with reaching out to fisher people. Let's see, I think I maybe and just the other one, which you were just discussing about leasing when it's such a long process. Why would any company want to do a lease agreement? Because PacWave, as I said in my comments, I think they're 10 years into the whole process. Oh, the other big comment I have, and last one, is my concern that the big energy people now, energy users, are the AI people and big companies like Google. I would hate to see this whole process be kidnapped down the road by AI companies that are making billions of dollars off of it, and it doesn't really help our whole energy grid system. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate it. Amy, we'd love to hear from you too.
Hi there, Amy Jester with the Redwood Region Climate and Community Resilience Hub. I just wanted to make a note, first of all, appreciating everybody that has contributed to this pathways document and where we are currently. I understand the reason for orienting the pathways slides to the development and operation of the wind energy areas, given their kind of critical role in kind of framing up how Oregon might engage in offshore wind. But I do think that there could be value in orienting to the kind of offshore wind energy cluster as a whole. And there are points along each of the slides that do some of that where, supply chain and I don't see transmission in there, but when we think about it, it's like supply chain transmission, port development, where there's relevance of those other elements of the offshore wind energy cluster to points along each of the pathways. For example, public engagement, tribal consultation, legally binding commitments, community investment needs. So those are all applicable to elements in addition to the wind energy areas. So I just wanted to make a point about that. And then also on the first slide, related to community investment needs, something else that could be important to pair with that is what a revenue share model might be to support those community investment needs. That's all. Thanks.
Suzanne, Amy, thank you for those. And for you two, and really anybody, if there are some specific comments or details or other things like that, feel free to grab that QR code. And then if you send it along the way, that'll help Sophia and I make sure we get it to Jeff as part of the input too. Other public comments, community comments, thoughts, feelings? Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much. Let's go ahead and take a lunch break. Apologies that again we only scheduled 30 minutes for lunch. But let's start back up at 1:15 p.m. The schedule has us starting at 1:10. So Jeff and Sophia and Trevor, let's just make sure we're here at 1:10 to welcome people, but everyone else just make sure you get your full 30 minutes. We'll come back out and jump back into small groups and talk a little bit about how we want to have the exit ramp conversation. All right. Take care, y'all. Get outside. Yeah, Trevor.
Real quick, for the folks with the RT prefix, if you're breaking for lunch, could you either mute and maybe turn off your video and keep on the Zoom so we don't have to reassign the RT? Or if you're jumping off and come back on, just make a little note to rename yourself when you come back on after lunch. That'd be really helpful for the breakouts. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Trevor. Thank you.
But we can use the minute.
Yep. And then Jeff, if you wouldn't mind just pausing the recording and the live stream. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everyone got a stretch, got some sunshine, got some food. If you are back in your seats, if you could give me a little emoji thumbs up or get your camera on or something just so perfect, just like that. Thank you. That way I kind of know folks are back and around. All right. So I was just chit-chatting with Trevor and Sophia and Jeff here just a little bit. So this next block of time, we were going to run from now until 2:30. And so the thinking was we'd do about 10 or 15 more minutes in small groups just to finish up kind of the specific feedback on the diagrams. And again, it sounds like we're getting both general feedback on the structure of the diagram. That's really helpful. And I want to make sure that if there are topics that you as Roundtable members have brought up or you've heard other people bring up, that you make sure that those are reflected in the waypoints along the diagram. That basically, there shouldn't be a topic that's important to you that you don't see a place on that diagram. Just make sure it's there. And then we'll do some report outs. The other item we have is to talk about exit ramps. Let me just share my screen here just a little bit. Get to that point. And so one of the items in your meeting materials is this memo that Jeff had put together around what might a reason for an exit ramp be? How would that actually happen? And then how would you kind of get out of that exit ramp? So whether it's phase gates or exit ramps, however we want to frame it in the future, Jeff has done some thinking based on feedback that you all have provided to try and organize some of that together. So one of the things we were thinking of today, because we might run short on time, is just to orient people to this document a little bit and then ask for specific feedback after the meeting. And then we can bring it back for another deeper conversation, or maybe the feedback offline is enough. But I just wanted to check that plan. For anybody who's kind of had a chance to look at and digest the exit ramps memo, does that plan seem okay if we just kind of orient people, ask some generalities, and then get specific feedback afterwards, or is there something different you'd like to do? Yeah, Delia?
Sorry. So I haven't spent any time with this yet, I'll admit, but I'm wondering if there's a relationship between the reason column, which is like the effects of concern, and the effects table that we looked at previously.
Really, there's some relation, but I would say that this is more derived from the roadmap considerations document from 2023. That there was a section in there that was based on a deeper discussion than we've had about what exit ramps mean, what might trigger one. And then what I did with this table was take that first start, which is what are the reasons why we might have one, and then try to take it the next step further to say, well, does the state have a mechanism that would actually like formally constitute an exit or not? Where we could, have an enforceable policy related to it. And then really that, how do we get out of an exit? Are there things that we've talked about through our process or just ideas I was able to come up with of, well, once you're in that condition, how do you get out?
Okay.
If it would be helpful.
Thanks. I think that would help guide whatever response you're asking for from the group afterwards. If we
Sure.
kind of, yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Bill, can I pick on you? Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, maybe we're going to ask similar questions, but my curiosity is for the group, what expectations did you have coming into this conversation, knowing that exit ramps was going to be on the agenda? You're coming in. Do you have ideas that you wanted to talk about? Am I going to be directing you into the weeds by focusing on this table when you'd rather have a more general conversation? I don't want to force you into the weeds unless that's where it makes sense to be.
Yeah. So Bill, same thing. If I can pick on you just to answer Jeff's question.
You mean in terms of its overall? I'm sort of
Yeah, for the exit ramp conversation, is it something that if we oriented you to that memo, you could just give us some comments back? We don't need to spend much time as it in a group setting. Or did you want to have a conversation in a group setting?
I think it's worthwhile to take a look at it individually and then have more productive conversations. I think we could spend a lot of time in the weeds and we'd lose out the opportunity to have more focused discussions.
Right on. Okay. So we're going to hold that hypothesis for right now is we'll orient you to the memo and get some feedback on it. And we'll use that to frame up some more specific conversations. All right. So with that, Trevor, are we ready to send people back to the breakout rooms?
Yes, we are ready.
Can I? Sorry, I don't know. I hit the wrong,
Yeah,
wrong emoji there.
I can't tell if you're laughing so hard you're crying or you got your hand up, Jason.
Yeah, sorry. Quick fingers here. I don't know how to get rid of that thing. Regarding the exit ramps, I agreed, that have time to look at that individually, but at a higher level, I did have two quick comments. One was and I mentioned this in the breakout group. I do appreciate how the exit ramp has been, and I think accurately and legal what's the word? I guess legally associated with the major federal actions. That's where the exit ramps exist, not in between those major federal actions: site assessment, construction operation plan, the leasing process, site identification. I think are the four that you had identified. I think that's right. But the other general comment I had about the exit ramp spreadsheet there is a question about how the issue is addressed. In other words, if you assert that, say, I'm making something up here. Has there been adequate tribal consultation? Well, okay. How does one determine whether there's been adequate tribal consultation? And that can be said about many of these issues. Is it is or is it ain't? We don't know. It's kind of a judgment call there, and I think it's important to understand what the sideboards are on what constitutes an adequate addressing of the issue. And I think that applies broadly across the entire roadmap process that we're laying out here. At the end of the day, if we agree on these things and time passes and things happen and a decision is made one way or the other, how do we address the assertion that there are problems with the process? Right? Yeah. How do we nip that in the bud so that if we agree to the process and we get through it, at the end of the day, Nobody raises their hands and says, well, we didn't like the process because for obvious reasons.
And no matter how clear I've ever defined a process, there's always that opportunity for someone not to like it.
It seems
But
like.
yeah, it's just this is the way it goes. But I think Jeff, I think that point, Jason's comment here also points to maybe we just walk through two of the rows, and you can kind of put some of the logic in there. Like, so for example, if there's a mechanism where there's a blank, like I don't know how we actually would operationalize an exit ramp like this, or if the idea of like how we would get out of it is to provide some of that clarity to the extent possible, knowing everything is case by case in some sense. But yeah, okay, so let's hold that and then we can come back to it. But I feel like walking through a couple rows to orient people would be helpful. All right, so going back to the diagrams again, overall structure of the diagram, that kind of feedback is super helpful. But even more so is just make sure that all the waypoint topics that you think are really important are reflected. All right, Trevor, let's go ahead and do that. And then I'll bring you back, I don't know, in like 10, so at 1:40.
Okay, 1:40. Hey, Bobby, I accidentally have your name assigned to my group, so you're going to be popped in, and then you can leave at any time.
Yeah, no sweat. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
Well, moderators, just as a reminder, if you could just make sure you've got the notes written down really clearly in your moderator notes, just so that as Sophia and I and others go to grab them, we can understand them and that they're there. All right. Let's just do a quick round robin of some of the overall themes and comments you guys shared. Let's think about like maybe 2 minutes per group. Don't worry about if you had some of the same comments as others, and we'll just kind of go through. And as always, we'll have the meeting summary prepared, and you'll get to see everybody's. Who wants to go first? Cynthia, who was your reporter?
Oh, probably me.
Then I'm gonna circle back around because ideally I'd like roundtable members to be the reporters if possible. So I'll circle back around.
Unless somebody else wants to. We didn't quite get to that point because I was taking all the notes.
Yeah, no worries. I'll let you in chat just kind of figure out who the reporters should be. How about you, Brett?
Nicole was going to be our reporter, but I don't think she's popped back on after lunch, and so I don't see her on the tiles. So Julia kind of agreed to. Julia felt that maybe Nicole she had some points that she was going to be able to make maybe a little bit more directly, but Julia has agreed to be kind of the follow up to be able to convey things.
Appreciate that, Julia. Yeah, Nicole bailed on you.
We were actually one of the groups. Yeah, we were one of the groups that we actually had a pretty nice wrapped conversation after the first round, and we're ready to go. You would have gotten probably a more detailed and nuanced update or roundup from Nicole. Natalia also had some really good detailed feedback, but I'll just give a really high level takeaway of what I heard in the conversation. There was kind of more broad feedback on how to overall improve and provide clarity to the graphic and kind of getting at language and semantics in a way that I think is important and relevant. Like the phrase "go no go" is a little bit too. It's not very solution oriented, and it's like, and rather than it being like no go, it's like no go really means what still needs to be done in order for it to be a go, right? What do we still have to figure out in order to move forward? So the no go kind of doesn't feel as solution oriented or iterative as we would like the process to show. So I think phrasing matters. So like, let's try to finesse the language a little bit. There was also a lot of feedback that was kind of brought up earlier from Nicole in the group setting about how different dots along the line are actually iterative or ongoing throughout the process, and finding a better way to show that in the visualization. and maybe getting a little bit more specific as well about um, like like information gaps or specific things that are needed in order to get through the gate. Like, what is the key in order to open the door? You know what I mean? Making sure that there's clarity, not just about like what needs to happen by when, but a little bit about the like how that happens is this. We have this question answered, or this report has come out, or whatever the thing is. So, and I'm feeling like those are I think there was quite a few more like nitty-gritty substantive pieces of feedback about specific points along the line. But I think those are just kind of best captured in notes, and I don't have those articulated in my head right now.
Okay, that was great. Thank you, Julia. Sophia, how about for your group? Who's your reporter?
Thank you, Bobby. We didn't get to that point to decide, but I was inviting Bill or Jason if they would like to report out for the whole group.
I guess I hit the unmute too quickly here.
Thank you.
There were one of the points that Jason made early on, and it's a significant conundrum. It's to have a process that everybody agrees that once we've done the process, we don't go back and relitigate the process. And that's a challenge because as you learn more, you go, oh, we could do it better. And so that's just something to be considering. Then I kind of kept on my little soapbox about preliminary or cumulative effects assessments, and I don't like PEISs. I've done them, but I talked to BOEM early on, and they said, no, we won't do it. Of course, then they did it for California. But the objective is to get a cumulative effects that is started so that people can have input as to what we would think about how many projects, where would they be, those sorts of things in a general sense, so we could identify gaps. And so in terms of putting it in the diagram, having it early on in, say, slide 3, but then we continue to have it as again in slide 4, that like many of the other dots on here, it's a process that continues through. So making sure that it is, and this is the challenge, how do you represent that in a well, the engineering side says you get started at the left and you go to the right and you do steps as they go along, but that's not how this process will go. So that was about it, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if Jason, Karina, Rachel,
I guess the only thing I would add is, in the back of my mind, I didn't articulate it very well, I suspect, is again, I think we're just facing the limitation of the tool. How it's laid out is, I mean, it's helpful for what it is. But reflecting Bill's comments, that some aspects of the process extend over, large segments of the entire process, in which case a different tool like a Gantt chart or some sort of project approach tool is maybe makes sense just visually so that folks understand that tribal engagement doesn't start and stop in the first phase. It extends across the entire process. So I think that's just one good example of why the tool we're using has some sort of built-in limitations.
Eva, who is your reporter?
Hi, I believe I am the reporter for the group, but I am going to call, on anyone if they would like to jump in. But we can move to another group if you'd like. I sent some private messages calling on people.
Perfect. Yeah, if you all are noticing, Roundtable members, I'm not letting our staff folks do the reporting this time. I really want to hear from you all. Cynthia, were you able to get someone to raise their hand?
I didn't see anybody and I didn't do any private messaging. I wasn't able to do that in time. But if there's anybody in our group that wants to try to summarize anything, that'd be great. If not, I have the notes and I don't mind.
I can start. I initially had a few questions. I know that the layout was a little bit limited. I didn't see exactly what point public commenting would be. And I know it was tribal engagement first, then tribal consultation. And so I didn't know at what point if public commenting would be before tribal consultation because it seemed to be one of the last stages before siting. And I also brought up expectations that BOEM and state agencies should have before engagement, an understanding of the tribes and their treaty rights, and what are the expectations of them to help alleviate tribal capacity. And the last was more of a question of why wasn't tribal consent brought up anywhere when it has been raised? I've only seen agreements, co-stewardships, engagement, tribal consultation, which is great, and interest, but I think tribal consent is a concept in itself of does it fit into consultation or is it its own process? Because I saw that on that roadmap that there was a mention of quote unquote avoidance areas from state-led spatial planning honored. And I think it was the hopes of the tribes that there would be something similar and to open those discussions.
Thank you, Carlin. Anybody else want to comment from our group?
Yeah, I'll just chime in here and say, maybe it's difficult to know the waypoints and how effective an on-ramp or an exit ramp or off-ramp would actually work without clarity of what the state's role or co-role could look like, unless it's the driver or the referee or the moderator. So I kind of just encourage, like, if there are state policy interventions, like maybe the state holds the policy for transmission or an offtake power. So it has the leverage of the power of saying yes or no. And I think, that's to maybe, I think Carlin's point, I think understanding maybe it's a co-role with tribes. Like, I think it'd be really good to explore again the differences here between consultation and consent, but how do we ensure that there is a driver or co-driver, so that we can ensure each step of these processes are actually meaningful, that they're effective, and that I think if the state in a co-role with tribes want to actually explore the exit ramp, you have the power to do that. So I think that's just kind of a consideration that I sort of wanted to offer. I know Mike mentioned here, like maybe revisiting sort of the wave energy project. It seems like we're kind of just working around the deficiencies and concerns with working with BOEM. But again, I think that's just adding another point that's been mentioned in the group conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Ramfis. I'll just follow up with what Mike was talking about. He had a couple other ideas of, looking at the broader ocean renewable energy and maybe what role do we play minus the federal administration or federal government role in it? Is there something that can be pursued? Is that something that we put into the roadmap? And then he had a comment about the port infrastructure readiness plan as Coos County is updating their estuary plan to have some kind of tie in with their estuary plan regarding the port readiness plan. A little premature right now, but kind of having that local connection. Thanks.
Thanks, Cynthia. Yeah, Jason.
I wanted to ask a question, reflecting the comment we just heard about, other forms of energy from the ocean. And as maybe some of you all may know, that's really my bailiwick Started this as Oregon Wave Energy Trust back in 2007. And most of my team works on marine energy, wave and tidal in particular. Offshore wind is just happens to be, the area that I've been focused on for the last few years. But I am very curious. It keeps coming up, and I think that there is some interesting developments that have occurred over the last few years regarding wave energy, which for those who were not at that process, the TSP process, some of the resistance and opposition and concerns and opinions that you're hearing as part of the offshore wind were very prevalent during the wave energy conversation. It's just the conversation has now shifted from wave energy to offshore wind. So if we're going to talk about wave energy, which personally, I'm keen. I just don't know whether it's in the scope here, and it keeps coming up, and it is an interesting question because it would be happening more or less on the outer continental shelf outside state waters, since for the simple fact that there are only two places in Oregon where you can do wave energy in state waters. That's Camp Rylea and off of the dunes between Reedsport and Coos Bay. Neither of which is particularly well suited for community scale marine energy, which is sort of the hot spot and the opportunity that I think is very interesting. But I want to stop there because I do think there's a whole nother topic, but I think it's related, and I think some folks' opinion, now that offshore wind is presenting itself, the idea of community scale wave energy might seem a little bit more palatable and interesting.
Yeah, I heard the idea of kind of the wave energy was one of those cross checks just to make sure we're covering a lot of the same points that the wave energy process was looking at. And Jeff, to Jason's point, is of making sure we're looking to see multiple forms of energy and we're not trying to create different processes for everything, maybe.
Yeah, well, if I can just think out loud for a second, when I think about where the potential synergies are, I think about the spatial planning piece that we talked about this morning, that if you're going to be looking out there to see what's suitable for wind energy, there might be a comparative analysis to say, is this area more suitable for wave than wind because of something like the visual profile or the way that it would be moored or whatever, that there may be a synergy you could capture as part of a recommendation in the roadmap to say, if you're going to do this for wind, you might as well tack on wave while you're at it. Similarly, if we're talking about supply chain readiness, port development needs, or potential economic benefits and job creation that could come from offshore wind, is it that much of a stretch to say, how different would it be under a wave regime versus a wind regime? And are there comparative findings that could lead into that energy strategy question of what are the reasons why we would pursue one energy source over another, if it's not simply price per megawatt hour, if there are other factors the state might want to consider? Is there benefit in recommending that any analysis we do collect information on more than one option? But just thinking out loud.
Yeah, and I do want us to get through hearing from the other groups and then move on here as well. Susan, I'll let you jump in, and then Ramfis, can I ask you to just drop a comment into chat? Susan, where'd you go?
Well, I lowered my hand because I figured we wanted to move on, but I can be really quick.
Yeah.
One, with regard to Jason's comment about wave energy, back in 2007, 2008, it was a lot different than wind energy because there was this gold rush or, buying up or at least, having site plans for many different nearshore spaces. And nearshore is where we do a lot of our fisheries. So it is a little bit different. There are some similarities, of course, but there is not, at least I don't see the offshore wind gold rush for space like there was with wave energy. To Jeff's point, I think there are some synergies that we can find through this process in finding areas that might be applicable to either or wind or wave, or maybe, some people have proposed aquaculture with offshore wind. Maybe there's some things like that we can think about. So that's all I had. Thank you. Sorry.
No, you're good. Thank you. Trevor, who's your reporter?
We have Dawn from our
Yeah,
group. I
I'll
can
jump in.
share.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So we talked about a few different things, some of which related to the how to sort of communicate the diagram. We got a bit hung up on the question marks, whether those were questions for us or as roundtable members, or questions that we are saying need to be asked before the next waypoint. So that's just sort of a bit of a nuanced language thing. And we also talked a little bit about, well, we didn't come up with a concrete solution for this, but just talked about the need to sort of think about how to communicate that it's not a totally linear process where one waypoint leads directly to the next one to the next one. A lot of these things occur sort of synergistically and overlap in their time scale. So those were sort of some of the diagram related comments that we had, and also just thinking about what is the goal of this diagram? Is it as a public communication piece for sort of here is what we are thinking this process looks like, or is it meant to be a guide for steps that should be taken? So those were sort of the comments on the diagram and the process. In terms of content within the diagram, some things that I'll just pull out a couple things that we talked about that were a little bit more specific. One was use of the word surveys that comes up in the diagram and also in the exit ramps table a number of times. As a biologist, to me, I hear that as like fisheries surveys or at-sea surveys, but that could also be interpreted as like surveys of the community to, in terms of thinking about community benefit agreements, or surveys being done by the lessee. So just some clarity of language that could be interpreted very differently by different people in different fields. And a couple other sort of more specific points that we talked about in the diagram were relating to making sure there's language in there about data gaps and filling those data gaps and where that happens. So the way we sort of discussed it was that the data identifying data gaps may happen at sort of the like in the leasing phase or leading up to the leasing phase, whereas dedicated efforts to fill those gaps may happen at a different phase, like the permitting phase. And another thing that maybe this will be the last thing that I highlight is there's language around adaptive management throughout, but particularly in the later phase, the construction and operation phases. And we just wanted to emphasize that any sort of like adaptive management or adaptive decision making rests on monitoring and reporting. And so we wanted to also just recommend that monitoring and reporting be maybe elevated to sort of its own standalone bullet point or set of bullet points in the construction and operations phases of the diagram. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for dealing with my notes here. A lot of words. Anybody else?
Thanks for taking the detailed notes. Appreciate it.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing.
Lisa, was your group able to find a reporter?
Well, we decided that I'll just give the high level and then they'll jump in because I was writing the notes. So what I will say is that generally there was agreement that the waypoints were the ones that would need to be identified. They appreciated the format, that it all makes sense at like that 10,000 foot level. But once you get into the details, that's where the conversations really took place. And some of the key places where we focused some of the conversation on was around the need for guidance on process. So we bring all these perspectives to the table. How do you get to the end of that? What are the trade-offs? How do you make those trade-offs? What's the process that's going to help that? And then also some language nuances, exit ramp versus off ramp, things like that, where they feel very differently to people. Jason was going to jump in first, and then we'll see if John, I think I've lost a lot of my people. So Jason was going to jump in next.
Mr. Searman, I think.
Yeah, hey everybody, another Jason. I think she did a great job of summarizing it. I was probably minimally vocal. I raised a couple points. One thing we talked about was there was a couple questions in our first break before we disbanded and came back about, the needs of energy and where that box gets checked off or how that evolves throughout the life cycle of these projects. So I think there were some other considerations too that maybe I didn't see as pointedly called out that would fall into like some of those same buckets of like welcome from the state was one of the questions for one of these exit ramps. And it was like, do we need the power, some kind of market signal for developers? And I just raised the idea that there's a lot of different motivations for offshore wind, and some of those aren't even about needing anything, right? Do you want a bigger port? Do you want port upgrades? Do you want jobs? Are these opportunities and not needs? And those are welcoming signs too, right? So whatever we need to do to bring people to the table to talk about this, is kind of those questions that would fall under that welcome from the state. So do we want the jobs? Do we want port upgrades? Some of that stuff is also severable from offshore wind. So you could do these things in different timelines as well, getting back to that timeline piece. And then I think just a couple seconds on the wind versus wave. I do think my general comment was like, I don't know if I spelled it out this way, but having good be the enemy of perfect and stuff. And I keep looking at all these little waypoints and check-ins and stuff. And it's like, you could describe this as like the perfect roadmap. I don't even know if that's the right way to describe it, but, certainly we probably just need to make sure we're not letting perfect be the enemy of good enough, and understanding that this is going to be iterative, and then understanding that the roadmaps for wind are probably going to be different than the roadmap for wave. In many regards that kind of overlap with what I was just talking about, right? Like the major opportunity with offshore wind has something to do with the energy, but really it's about jobs and it's about ports and it's about all these other things. It's about the scale, right? To say it more directly and clearly, right? What offshore wind has that wave energy doesn't have at this time and for the foreseeable future is a relatively proven technology at scale. That's the key, right? And so the scale of offshore wind is the opportunity, not offshore wind itself. It is how big this infrastructure is going to be, which is part of the challenge ahead of us, right? That's what everybody's worried about, all these impacts. So it just goes both ways, no matter how you look at it. Wave was a different animal, right? So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood all that.
Thanks, Jason.
And then Kevin, John, and Laurel were also in my group. Would any or all of you like to add something as well?
I think the summary so far really captured it. I have nothing further.
Thanks, Kevin. John gave a thumbs up. I don't know if Laurel's still on.
She's good.
She's good. Okay, there we go.
Eva, what'd your group come up with? And yeah, if you wanted to report, that's fine.
Thank you for giving us more time to communicate in the chat. I'm going to ask David Petrie to share some of his thoughts from our conversation, and then I'll fill in if there's anything else from the notes here.
David, what do you got? You're on mute still.
Thank you for that, Eva. So engaging with the other group members and
in talking through this process that you've developed quite well, Jeff. Thank you. In tracking offshore wind from a global perspective, and my wanting to understand more about this industry. And this is my 14th year, and I'm still learning things that actually relieve some of the stressors that I have and the impact of the environment and the benefits to society. But with Oregon and the new administration's clear effort to stall out and stop offshore wind, I believe Oregon has an opportunity to collect data from LiDAR buoys off of Oregon's coast. And it's my thinking, not specific to offshore wind, but the sensors to track changing ocean conditions, the felling agents in the water columns, the migration of the fish and whales and flight of avian life for our own benefit. Because NOAA's budget's been cut 27%. And who knows where this is going with the current administration and who's going to be on board after this administration. So Oregon, in my opinion, should really, take an active role in data collection and dissemination. And when I talked about this last, there was, I call it lifetime data. There was a comment, it's real-time data for tribes and disseminating that information directly to them without it being filtered so that traditional indigenous knowledge can be utilized in interpreting that data, I believe has some value, and I certainly would support that. But overall, the LiDAR buoys that the OEMs I've been researching and actually engaged with in Ireland and Spain and in France, the buoys are available. I've actually did some costing on one, but it's really Oregon that's going to have to take a step to engage in this data collection that's going to check some of the boxes and de-risk any future investment by developers in offshore wind. So I would just, hope that as time passes that our state and our native nations can work together to find solutions to address climate change, because that's really the reason we're talking about this at all.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. And Rick was also in our group. Yeah, please, Rick.
Sorry, I'm leaving my video off. I've got some connectivity issues. One thing I mentioned during our discussion was, as folks know, there's been frustration. So along the chart, there was reference to the PEIS process and particularly cumulative impacts analysis. Some of us have been frustrated with how BOEM does that process, and the current administration has significantly changed the NEPA regulations, which probably will make that even less of a robust analysis process. So if we want to have a good cumulative effects analysis, I think that's something that needs to happen outside of the federal process.
Thank you, Rick. And one last thing I would add that came up in our small group is just making sure that there's connections being made through and waypoints to update or make needed updates to state and local policies, like the Territorial Sea Plan. And I heard it in another group share out, but the Coos Bay Estuary Management Plan as well, to make sure that the development infrastructure needed on shore can support this process as well. And the processes needed for onshore development are moving along with this process as well. Thank you. And I don't know if anyone else from my group has something to share. I feel like we covered our discussion pretty well.
Jeff, did you want to react or you good?
Yeah, thank you. I asked this in one of the breakouts, but I guess I just wanted to ask and maybe reflect more generally, whether this speaks to people, whether it's something that can help us speak to the public. As was mentioned, this is a really complicated process, and figuring out how our roadmap can interact with this really complicated process is itself a complicated proposition. And my hope from generating this out of our discussions from November and beyond is to try to start organizing the conversation a little bit. And as I was mentioning in one of the breakouts, like we could probably write a chapter about every one of these dots. But does that give us enough to understand that there are things that are priorities and values for us as a state to see happen at each phase of development? And I take the point as well that it's not just development of offshore wind arrays, but also port development, transmission, these other parts of the cluster as well. So my hope, and I would be curious to know, is this enough to be organizing that conversation and to be having that conversation with the public to say, we're trying to find those things that are on the right path. And are we capturing those things that are on the right path with the recognition that there is a lot to the details? So that's my hope. What I'm hearing makes me hopeful, but I'm also hearing some really good feedback to tweak this. I am not a graphic savant, so like the points about there being better ways, yeah. We'll see what we can do.
And Jeff, to that point, and Kevin, I see you, is like for right now, I think for the roundtable, I'd like you all thinking of this less as a communications tool right now and more as like these are the points. And then developing it into a comms tool will come once we are sure what we're communicating. And we do have budget to get a graphic designer, and we're meeting with some of them later this week even to start. Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, and my comment is really going to go to what Jeff was led out saying in terms of whether the roadmap speaks to us. The content and much of the detail, absolutely. And I think a lot of people have supported that today in the comment. The part that doesn't speak to me, and I want to put it on the table, is the assumption of the 4-year pause. And this is a policy question, right? Because if we understand and accept what the consensus on the science says, do we have 4 years to pause? And if we don't have 4 years to pause because of the catastrophic impacts, even within the context of stated Oregon state goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by a certain amount, stretched 2030, but legally now at 2035. If we can't achieve that, or if that's going to, if waiting 4 years, if assuming a pause would sacrifice those goals or put them at serious risk, at what point does it fall on the state to exercise their rights to protect the interests of the citizens of the state of Oregon, because the federal government is abdicating? In other words, we're not dealing in a regular policy disagreement, and under law, the federal government has these rights and the states have these rights. When it comes to issues of national security, for example, the U.S. military says the number one threat to national security in the United States is climate change. If that is the kind of issue that is the reason why we're here talking today, at what point does the state take the position that we have to fight for the right to be able to transition to renewable energy in a timely enough manner to protect our progeny, to protect future generations from catastrophic, irreversible impacts, climate-related impacts, which will occur if we do wait and not fight So I'm throwing it out there because that's the part that doesn't speak to me. We don't have 4 years to wait.
Thanks, Kevin. All right. So there's going to be a whole bunch of next steps here that we're going to start articulating. So hopefully folks are getting their pens and pencils out for some homework assignments here in about 10 minutes. Jeff, I think I'm going to open up a public comment period because we said we'd do that at 2:10. And then I think we got to just orient people to what we didn't get to. And that's c'est la vie, eh? So is anybody, I'm going to go ahead and open a public comment period. Would anybody like to provide a comment that's not part of the roundtable? It's one of our community neighbors, broader public, friends that are here. Okay. Not seeing anybody. I'll do one more check just before we close the meeting out. But Jeff, do you want to orient us very briefly, like in kind of 2-3 minutes to the exit ramp memo? And then for folks listening for the roundtable, these are one of the things that we'd like more specific feedback on after the meeting.
Yep. I'll show one of the slides that is basically the same as the table that is in your meeting packet. So when I think about exit ramps, I'm thinking about two different things at this point. Because in the one hand, we have the considerations document that preceded our group, where this concept first arose, and it talked about things like inadequate consultation, lack of agreements that we need to see, unanswered questions about environmental effects, or unacceptable effects to fisheries, that all of these could be reasons to take a pause and either get the information we need, secure the agreement that we need to secure, conduct the consultation. And I hear, Carlin, your point about consent as well. Those things that we need to see in order to be comfortable getting back on track. So that's where this originated. But then also, I think something that came to me in developing these wavy diagrams is if you think about this more in terms of the phase gate concept, before we move into a new phase, we want to make sure that we have in our satchel that we're carrying with us all of those waypoints that you saw. And so the sequence of things matters less than you just want to have everything in your bag before you move on to the next place. So I do want to mention that we're kind of talking two different worlds, but what you see here on the screen is trying to build from the 2023 exit ramps conversation in the considerations document. And on the leftmost column, those were reasons that were described in that document. So for example, this top row, if we get to a point before permitting, so when the state is doing its consistency review, if the effects from the fully proposed project are not clearly understood, if there are unanswered important questions, or if the questions are answered, but the effects are unacceptable to the ecosystem or to a user where we have a policy that protects them, such as fisheries, then the state has a really clear exit mechanism. We can object under the Federal Consistency Authority, and that can kick out the entire thing, or the state can also put a stay on the review and essentially extend the timeline until we get the information that we need. Will demonstrate consistency. And so there's an exit mechanism that is just a no, and then there's an exit mechanism that says we're going to pause and let the information that we need come in. And so when I think about how could we improve it, I think it's already pretty good because it has this way to require the information that we're missing. And then thinking about how to get out of an exit. Stay agreements, as I just mentioned, can extend that review time and allow information to come in. So that's where you're sitting at the rest stop. Or you can have that yes if decision that I've talked about before, a conditional concurrence, where you might be able to adjust the project or include adaptive management measures that will help you proceed in in spite of the things you don't know, because you have built in some comfort that you can respond to whatever effects may come. Um, so there's an example of taking an exit ramp through its life cycle to, how you get out of it, and what the mechanism. The one right below it, I think, is interesting because we've talked in this group about wanting to see assurances that benefits to local communities outweigh the costs. But when I think about what the exit mechanism would be if we're not comfortable about that, I don't think there is one currently in the state based on how our enforceable policies are written. There isn't one that says the benefits to a local community from a project must outweigh the costs. Um, and if it did exist, well, then the state would have a mechanism to require that exit. But currently we don't. And so are there mechanism improvements? Well, there's a voluntary system of benefit agreements that can help to improve acceptability to communities. Or there's potentially an option to, are there different ways we could create policies that could create enforceable mechanisms to say, if we don't have assurances that benefits outweigh the costs, then we have a, a stronger way to hit the pause button. And then how you get out of it, what came to my mind was, again, benefit agreements with affected communities, with that enforceable mechanism allowed in there, or just as the permit materials are developed and as the project itself is designed, is it already pre-acknowledged and saying, here are the effects that we're going to proactively mitigate or compensate for? So as you look through the table, that's kind of the mindset that was going through. I did organize it as before leasing and before permitting being kind of the big points, because that's where the state has the role. We have the role at the leasing decision and the permitting decision. So one last thing I did want to call, and we'll call it good. That when we talk about, and we've talked about this earlier today, tribal consultation, and Jason brought up this point where if it is deemed to be inadequate, who is the judge of that? And I think that my answer to that would be, it depends on if the state has an enforceable policy when we're talking about the state's roadmap of whether the state could actually like step in that case, or put a pause on things. And so I think there is an interesting conversation to be had about if we have things that we want to put in our roadmap as these are reasons why we need to pause and wait for an outcome that lets us move forward, but we don't have a strict enforceable mechanism for it. Are there other ways to incentivize those things that we want to see or to require them before we move forward? Or is it simply just that the roadmap becomes an expectations communicating document to say, these are the things that we want to see happen again, but we may not have a mechanism to require it?
So, Jeff, on this one, in terms of feedback, we'll send some. It'll likely be some form of survey, given how much feedback we need on various things, with some particular questions going back and forth on some of these. Yeah, is that the feedback that would be most helpful right now? Well, not right now, in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, and as I start to form up this 10-pager draft of the roadmap, and then over the summer, as we start to really flesh this out, I think there is a conversation to be had with this group about what is the appropriate way to frame this concept of exit ramps, and how do we want the roadmap to speak to them.
Okay. Sounds good. So, like with the effects summary, I know some of the questions we ask you all might feel like they're beyond what you feel your expertise is. That's okay. Either do your best or tell us, oh my gosh, why are you asking me about this? I don't have anything to say about that. That's okay. Don't worry about it. I don't want anybody to feel like they need to go and get really in depth on things they don't feel like they can sign off on. So watch for next steps there. Jeff, would you mind showing your slides one more time? And I just want to flash one slide there at the end with the conversations that we didn't get to. So there's a set of conversations. If you remember in Lincoln City, you all started telling us these are the key conversations we've yet to queue up to have. So like protecting fisheries, really looking at a full social cost benefit analysis, supply chain, transmission needs, all of those, it's come up today. Like what are the actual goals or potential design scenarios of we have turbines or we don't have turbines. We have a lot of turbines or a few turbines. We have energy that lands in Oregon. We have energy that lands in California. Those are all conversations we haven't had yet. The feedback we need is, are those 13 conversations the right ones? Are there others that we haven't queued up that we need to think about? And which ones do we really need to have before June 30, before DLCD starts drafting or kind of a roadmap for us to look at in the fall? Or can we have them later on in the fall and winter? And then if we do need to have them, who needs to be there? What should be the goal? So that's some of the feedback we're going to ask for as well after today. So in terms of next steps, Jeff, we can stop sharing screen for now. The list of next steps that I've got is May 15th is our meeting in Brookings. We really hope you all can be there. We are going to ask you to RSVP for the Lincoln City meeting. We bought a crap ton of food that got wasted. So if you can, please RSVP so that we make sure that we're getting the right amount of food and designing a meeting that can engage folks as best as possible. We really hope you can make it in person. It's important to communities on the South Coast that we're there. We've got public meetings on April 14th, May 14th, and then either June 16th or 19th. But Jeff, I think we heard today, at least from CT Clusie, it'd be nice to have it closer to the 16th. We'll ask you for comments on the diagram. We'll ask you for comments on the exit ramps, and we'll ask you for comments on future conversations. So that's my list of next steps. From any roundtable members or kind of DLCD or OC team, anything on that list of next steps we're missing? We need to make sure we're paying attention to for you before May.
I do want to invite, if people want to mark up or provide feedback on the diagrams directly, please, you're welcome to. And we've captured conversations today. But
yes, Jeff, would it be okay if we ask people, we'll send people a link that we want them to do that to, just so that they're not accidentally doing it on 6 different versions and we don't know where it's going?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Any roundtable members? Anything else on next steps?
Just a last reminder that we're going to be in Seaside on April 24th, 5:30, the Chisholm Public Center. And if you can make it, we'd love to see you there.
And the email we'll send out with a survey, you'll get a link to RSVP, just like we have.
And then to Julia's question, specific location for Brookings. For the public meeting on the 14th, we're looking at the high school, but for the roundtable meeting, we're at the community college. Is that right, Bobby?
Southwest Oregon Community College Brookings campus. Yeah, and we don't have a room block set aside, and there are limited hotels in Brookings, so I would start checking that pretty soon. Well, y'all, thank you for all you gave today. There was a ton of listening that you all did. I did continue to encourage that, listening to what others are saying and thinking about how that matches with your interests and where we want to go together collectively. Hopefully you saw with the marine spatial planning what a recommendation can start to look like, the diagrams, like how this starts synthesizing together. And then with the process updates, how we're going to have time to digest all this information. So we don't have to finish it all by June 30. Okay. Jeff, any final words?
No, I'll just echo the thank you for all you're giving to this process.
Yeah. It wouldn't be anywhere near where it is today without you all. So thank you. All right, everybody. Be well, stay safe, enjoy life. And get ready. The May meeting packet's going to be a juicy one too. So get ready. Set aside your reading time. We're gonna have a really good document for y'all to look at in early May. Ciao.
Thanks a lot.
All right, Jeff. We can close the recording.